There is a sound the universe makes when everything is working exactly right. You've never heard it. Neither have I. Nobody has. Not the living, not the dead, not the things choking or burning out in the frozen vacuum between stars. Not because it's silent, because it's too heavy, too total. It's a frequency that exists entirely underneath the concept of sound, beneath vibration, beneath the basic physics of waves moving through matter. It is the hum of absolute balance, and the only ones who can actually hear it are the ones breaking their backs to maintain it. Take the Dragon Ball cosmos, if you can even call it a cosmos with our limited three-dimensional brains. There is a hierarchy there, vast, layered, deliberately, terrifyingly structured. Even the gods of destruction, beings who can literally sneeze a solar system into dust, only grasp a tiny fraction of the blueprint. At the very top, supposedly, sits Zeno, the Omni-King, the Eradicator, the entity who wipes out entire universes the way a bored kid smears a drawing off a foggy window. No grand philosophy, no malice. He just does it because, in that specific fraction of a second, he felt like it. When mortals figure out Zeno exists, their brains usually break. They either fall to their knees and worship, or they just completely collapse under the crushing weight of their own insignificance. But here is the secret. The one thing mortals completely misunderstand about the Omni-King. He isn't the system. He's just the switch. His name is Whis, and before you nod your head, thinking you know exactly what that means, stop. Because every story, every wiki page, every casual fan frames him as Beerus's attendant, the caretaker. The guy who wakes up a god of destruction from a 3-century nap, hands him a plate of food, and quietly, apologetically suggests that maybe, just maybe, glassing an entire civilization over a bad pudding cup is a bit much. Now our storyteller will continue the story.
That framing isn't wrong. It's just catastrophically incomplete. Whis is an angel, and wipe the human definition out of your head right now. No feathered wings, no harps, no soft, glowing light delivering messages from on high. An angel in this cosmos is infinitely more terrifying than that. An angel is a function. Think about that word, really think about it, not a person, not a personality with dreams or grief or a favorite color. A function just executes. Input goes in, the math processes, output comes out, the universe keeps spinning. But here is the ugly, dark truth buried underneath all the screaming power-ups and flashy tournament arcs. The angels were not created to serve the gods of destruction. The gods of destruction were manufactured to give the angels something to manage. Entropy needed a face, a personality. They needed a being with messy, raw appetites and unpredictable mood swings, because pure, faceless destruction, it's too clean, too mechanical, too ruthlessly efficient. A perfectly logical god of destruction wouldn't take naps or eat food. It would just end everything by Tuesday. So they made Beerus. Proud, petty, dangerously brilliant. A god who wipes out planets based on a whim just as often as cosmic necessity. And they assigned Whis to him. Not as a servant. As a regulator, a leash. The angels were not created to serve the gods of destruction. The gods of destruction were created to give the angels something to manage. Destruction needed a face, a personality, a being with appetites and moods and the unpredictability of genuine emotion, because pure, faceless destruction is too clean, too mechanical, too efficient. It would end everything. So they made Beerus. Proud, petty, brilliant, dangerous, a god who destroys based on whim as much as cosmic necessity. And they assigned Whis to him. Not as a servant, as a regulator. On this particular day, and day is a courtesy term here, because time in Universe 7 doesn't move the way mortals experience it. Whis was doing what Whis almost always does. Nothing that looks important. Everything that is. He was walking the edge of Universe 7's boundary, not patrolling. Angels don't patrol. That implies threat response, and Whis operates several layers above threat response. He was simply present, the way a master musician is present in a concert hall before the orchestra begins, not performing, just listening to the silence and already knowing if something is tuned wrong. And then, something. Not a sound, not a vibration, not an energy reading or a power level or any of the measurable, quantifiable signals that even the gods use to understand their cosmos. Something older than all of those. A wrongness. In 10 billion years of existence, 10 billion years of managing gods, correcting cosmic errors, watching universes get born and erased and reborn, Whis had felt wrongness before. He had felt the wrongness of a god of destruction going too far. The wrongness of a mortal touching power they weren't built to hold. The wrongness of time being fractured, of timelines splitting, of the multiverse developing cracks in the architecture. He had felt all of those things. And he had corrected all of those things. Quietly, efficiently, without drama. But this wrongness was different. This wrongness didn't feel like something breaking. It felt like something arriving. Something that had no origin point in any universe he had ever cataloged. Something that existed outside the system entirely. And for the first time in a very, very long time, Whis became still. This is not a story about a battle. This is not a story about who is stronger. This is a story about what happens when two different kinds of infinite finally look each other in the eye and realize that neither of them has ever seen anything like the other. One of them will find that thrilling. One of them will find it deeply, cosmically, quietly concerning. The Beyonder is coming, and Whis already knows that stopping him was never going to be an option. The only question that matters is whether he can make him understand before the trying to understand. Tears everything apart. There is a rule among angels. It is never spoken aloud. Not because it's forbidden, not because it carries some terrible cosmic consequence. It's because angels don't narrate reality. You don't announce that gravity pulls. You don't hold a seminar to discuss the fact that fire is hot or that the void is freezing. These things simply are. And the unspoken rule is this: nothing comes from the outside. Absolutely nothing, not a stray frequency, not a wandering consciousness, not a piece of some shattered reality looking for a place to bleed into. The system is total, it accounts for everything. The 12 universes sit inside a structure that technically has walls, but they aren't walls made of stone or energy. They are walls made of concept. You can't go beyond them because beyond isn't a location, it's a math error, it just isn't. Outside the system, there is no outside, there is just nothing. And nothing cannot produce something. This isn't a working theory, this is the foundational architecture of existence. Which is exactly why, when Whis felt it, his first instinct wasn't fear. It was a cold, structureless weight, pressing against the very edge of Universe 7, like a heavy thumb pushing hard against the fragile membrane of a soap bubble. His reaction was infinitely worse than fear, it was revision. He had to revise an absolute truth, and in 10 billion years, an angel almost never has to do that. He didn't move right away. That's the thing mortals and even gods get fundamentally wrong about Whis. They see his stillness and assume it's hesitation. They think he's pausing because he's startled or because he's trying to figure out what to do. He isn't pausing, he's already done it. Every scenario, every branch, every catastrophic outcome cascading forward through time with a precision that makes prophecy look like child's play. By the time Whis actually moves a muscle, the decision was made 3 steps ago. What you're watching is just the execution. So when he stood at the boundary of Universe 7 and felt that impossible wrongness pushing in, he was dead still for exactly 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, he ran the math. The presence was vast, that much was inarguable, but not vast like Beerus or vast like Zeno. Those were scales Whis had mapped and managed for eons. This was different. This was the vastness of something that had never been measured because nothing had ever existed to measure it against. It didn't register on a single angelic threat scale, not because it was beneath them, because it was completely perpendicular to them, like trying to measure the temperature of a color. Then he felt its intent. That was the detail that shifted his entire threat matrix. It wasn't aggressive. It was interested. There's a very specific, terrifying danger that lives in pure interest, consequence-free curiosity, unleashed by something that has no natural boundaries and no concept of what a boundary even is. Whis had seen it in young gods of destruction who hadn't yet learned that wanting to know how a galaxy burns and actually burning it are two very different things. This was that exact same energy, scaled up to a level that made a god of destruction look like a toddler playing with matches. Whis tilted his head. He made a low sound in the back of his throat, something caught halfway between acknowledgement and a calculation. Interesting. He didn't say it loudly. Volume is a tool for people who are afraid they won't be heard. He said it to the boundary, to the presence pushing against it, to the universe at large, which had absolutely no idea what was coming. If you could pull back far enough to see Universe 7 in that exact fraction of a second, here is what it looked like. Vast, luminous, humming with a billion simultaneous processes, stars violently igniting, planets freezing over, civilizations rising and making the exact same ugly mistakes they always make. And somewhere in the middle distance, a god of destruction sleeping so heavily that 3 neighboring solar systems were subtly shifting their orbits just to avoid waking him up. So when he stood at the boundary of Universe 7 and felt that wrongness pressing in from outside, from a place that wasn't supposed to have an outside, he was still for approximately 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, he calculated. The presence was vast, that much was immediate and inarguable. Not vast the way Beerus was vast, or the way Xena was vast. Those were vastnesses Whis understood, had mapped, had worked alongside for longer than most civilizations had existed. This was a different kind of vast. This was the vastness of something that had never been measured because there had never been anything outside the system capable of measuring it. It didn't register on any of the scales angels used to assess threats, not because it was beneath those scales, because it was adjacent to them, perpendicular, like trying to measure the temperature of a color. He felt its curiosity before he felt anything else. That was the detail that mattered. That was the detail that shifted his calculations from one category of response to another. It wasn't aggressive. It was interested. There's a particular kind of danger that lives in interest, in pure, unlimited, consequence-free curiosity unleashed from a being with no natural boundaries and no understanding of what boundaries are for. Whis had seen it before in smaller doses in mortals who touched divine power for the first time, in young gods of destruction who hadn't yet learned that wanting to know what something does and simply asterisk doing it to find out are not the same thing at all. This was that same energy, scaled to something that made gods of destruction look like children playing with M. Watches. He tilted his head, made a sound that wasn't quite a hum and wasn't quite a word, something between acknowledgement and calculation. Then he spoke, not loudly. Whis almost never spoke loudly. Volume, in his experience, was a tool of beings who weren't certain they'd been heard. Whis was always heard. Interesting, he said. To no one in particular. To the boundary. To the presence pressing against it. To the universe at large, which had no idea what was coming, and would have absolutely no mechanism for processing it if it did. Here is what Universe 7 looked like in that moment, if you could have seen it from far enough away. Vast, quietly luminous, going about the 10,000 simultaneous processes that constitute a living universe, stars being born, planets cooling, civilizations rising and making the same mistakes civilizations always make, and somewhere in the middle distance, a god of destruction sleeping so deeply that 3 nearby solar systems were subtly reorganizing themselves to avoid making noise. Normal. Everything normal. Except at the very edge, at that shimmering, nearly invisible boundary where Universe 7's structured existence gave way to the interuniversal void, there was a pressure. Soft, patient, enormous. Like an ocean pressing against a window. And the window was holding. For now, Wise turned from the boundary and began walking, not away from it exactly, but parallel to it, thinking, or doing the angel equivalent of thinking, which looked like thinking but operated several layers deeper. The Grand Priest would need to know, that was a certainty. Whatever this presence was, it existed outside the jurisdiction of any single universe, which meant it technically fell under the purview of the angel hierarchy's highest authority. Protocol was clear on that. But protocol also assumed that any anomaly could be categorized using existing frameworks. Wise was becoming increasingly certain that this one could not. He paused, reached out not physically but with that deeper sense that angels develop over millennia, the one that mortals have no name for because they've never experienced anything close to it. The sense that doesn't just detect power or energy or intent, the sense that reads the asterisk nature of a thing, its fundamental composition, what it is made of at the level below matter, below energy, below even the abstract forces that underpins reality. He reached out with that sense and touched the presence at the boundary. What came back stopped him completely. It wasn't a power reading. It wasn't an energy signature. It wasn't even a consciousness in the way Wise understood consciousness. That layered, complex architecture of thought and memory and desire and identity that every being in every universe carried like a fingerprint. What came back was simpler than all of that, and more terrifying. What came back was everything. Not everything in the sense of vast knowledge or accumulated experience. Everything in the sense of completeness. This presence, this thing pressing against the boundary of Universe 7 from a place that wasn't supposed to exist. It wasn't part of anything. It wasn't a fragment of a larger whole. It wasn't a god or a being or an entity in the traditional sense. It was, as far as Wise could determine in that first terrible moment of contact, something that existed entirely on its own terms. Outside every system. Beyond every hierarchy, answering to nothing, needing nothing, and currently with the patient and genuinely innocent curiosity of something that had never once been told that curiosity had consequences. Trying to come in. Wise withdrew his sense carefully, deliberately. The way you withdraw your hand from something you've just realized is much hotter than it appeared. He stood very still for a moment. Then he did something that, in 10 billion years of existence, he had done perhaps a handful of times. He reached up and held his staff with both hands. Not as a weapon. Wise didn't think in terms of weapons, that was Beerus's language, and Wise had always found it a rather limited vocabulary. He held it the way a conductor holds a baton before the first note of a symphony that he already knows is going to be the hardest performance of his life. Preparing, centering, finding the balance within himself before the thing that threatened to unbalance everything else arrived. Because it was going to arrive, that much was already determined. The boundary of Universe 7 was strong enough to keep out anything that originated within the system, anything that played by the rules of structured existence. It was designed for exactly that. It was not designed for this. Whatever this was, this vast, complete, systemless, infinitely curious presence, it wasn't breaking through the boundary. It was simply going to step through it. Because boundaries to something that exists outside the concept of boundaries are not barriers. They're just textures. Wise exhaled slowly. The sound of balance, that deep, total, perfect sound that only angels can hear, was still there. But it had a new quality to it now. Something underneath the usual tone. The way a perfectly tuned instrument sounds when someone in the room is about to play something in an entirely different key. Not wrong yet, but about to be tested. And Wise, 10 billion years old, attendant to a god of destruction, regulator of a universe, keeper of a balance that most beings couldn't even conceptualize, stood at the edge of everything he had ever maintained. And waited. Not because he had no choice. Because of all the options he had calculated in those 4 seconds of stillness. Waiting was the only one that didn't make things worse. The Beyonder was here. And he hadn't even fully arrived yet. This is such a profound way to introduce one of the most overpowered characters in fiction. You aren't just giving us a power-scaling breakdown, you are giving us a psychological profile of a god. The tide pool metaphor at the end is absolutely perfect. To make this hit with that raw human rhythm, I leaned heavily into the messy logic and visceral reality rules. I made the concept of cosmic loneliness feel physically suffocating, and I roughed up the description of the Marvel Multiverse to contrast it sharply with the clean, structured Dragon Ball cosmos you set up previously. Here is the revised, humanized script. Before we even touch the Beyonder, we have to talk about loneliness. Not the kind you know, not an empty apartment or a text left on read, or sitting in a crowded room where nobody actually gets you. I'm talking about the suffocating, crushing weight of being the only thing. Imagine, and you can't, your brain literally isn't built for it, but try, imagine existing before existence, before the concept of other was even a rough draft, before the universe finally decided that matter was less boring than the void and kicked off the slow, violent process of becoming everything. Imagine being the only consciousness floating in that. Not alone in a universe. Alone as the universe. No edges, no contrast, nothing to push against, nothing to compare yourself to, nothing to make you understand what you are, because understanding requires something outside of yourself to measure against. Just you, infinite, complete, and utterly, devastatingly, meaninglessly alone. That is the Beyonder's origin. It's not a story. It's not some grand myth with drama and meaning baked into the text. It's just a cold, hard fact. He existed before. And everything, every single action he has taken across every universe, every twisted test he has constructed, every reality he has casually shattered, it all traces back to that one, bleeding foundational wound. He was alone first, and in all the infinite stretch of his existence, he has never fully recovered from it. Now the Marvel Multiverse, if you aren't familiar with it, it's a mess. It is not 12 neat little universes sitting in a clean hierarchy under Zeno. It is a sprawling, chaotic, overlapping tangle of realities, broken timelines, and pocket dimensions bleeding into each other so badly that even the gods who live there have given up trying to catalog it all. There are cosmic entities, literal forces of nature that just woke up one day and decided to be characters: eternity, infinity, death, oblivion. There are celestials grinding through galaxies like slow-moving glaciers, and there are entities stacked above them. And above those, a hierarchy so absurdly tall that even the most powerful beings in creation occasionally look up and realize with quiet, nauseating humiliation that they are still at the bottom of somebody else's food chain. The Beyonder didn't sit at the top of that ladder. He wasn't even in the same building. He was outside. The entire Marvel Multiverse, every timeline, every cosmic hierarchy, every celestial, every living concept given form, all of it combined amounted to exactly one single drop of water compared to the limitless, crushing ocean of the Beyonder's native dimension. He wasn't powerful within the system. He wasn't of the system. He just looked at it from the outside, found it mildly interesting, and stepped in. Exactly the way you step into a tide pool to poke at the small, fragile things living inside it. Curious, gentle by his own estimation, trying very hard not to accidentally crush anything important beneath his boot. But not always succeeding. The Marvel Multiverse, if you are unfamiliar, is not simple. It is not 12 universes sitting in a structured hierarchy under a Child King with godlike erasure power. It is not clean, it is not organized. It is a sprawling, chaotic, overlapping tangle of realities and timelines and pocket dimensions and abstract entities so vast and so numerous that even the beings who live within it have largely given up trying to catalog it all. There are cosmic entities, forces given form, abstract concepts that decided at some point to become characters in their own story: eternity, infinity, death, oblivion. There are celestials who move through galaxies like glaciers. There are entities above them, and above those. layer after layer after layer of cosmic authority stacked so high that even the most powerful beings in the multiverse occasionally discover with quiet humiliation that there is something above them they hadn't accounted for. The Beyonder sat above all of it. Not within it, not at the top of the hierarchy, not the highest rung on a ladder that still has a ground floor. Outside it, the entire Marvel Multiverse, every universe, every timeline, every abstract entity, every cosmic hierarchy, every celestial and every god and every living concept given form, all of it together constituted one single drop of water compared to the ocean that was the Beyonder's native dimension. He was not powerful within the system. He was not of the system. He had looked at the system from outside, found it interesting, and stepped in. The way you step into a tide pool to look at the small creatures living there. Curious, gentle by his own estimation, trying very hard not to step on anything important. Not always succeeding. He had learned things. In his time within the Marvel Multiverse, he had learned enormous things. He had learned about desire, that specific, aching, mortal, and divine hunger for something you don't currently have. This concept had fascinated him above all others because it was the one thing he had never personally experienced. He was complete. He had always been complete. He lacked nothing because lacking required the prior existence of need, and need had never been part of his architecture. But mortals and gods were built around it. Every story, every conflict, every war, and every love, and every moment of transcendence he had ever witnessed in the Marvel Multiverse had desire at its root. He wanted to understand that. Truly understand it, not observe it, not catalog it, not reconstruct it intellectually from the outside. Understand it the way you understand fire, by feeling the heat. This had led to experiments, to Battle World, to the Secret Wars, to moments where his attempts to learn had accidentally, genuinely accidentally, caused more destruction than most cosmic events in recorded history. He had not meant to cause harm. He had simply not fully understood that understanding, when pursued without restraint by something infinite, is itself a form of violence. On the day he found the boundary of a cosmos so structurally foreign to anything in the Marvel Multiverse that his awareness had snagged on it like fabric on a nail, the Beyonder had been in the middle of something else entirely. He had been watching. This was his most common state in the long stretches between his more dramatic interventions. Watching, moving through the multiverse like weather, present but not always active, observing the 10,000 simultaneous dramas of existence with the patient attention of someone who has nowhere else to be and all of time in which to be there. He had been watching a civilization on the far edge of a universe he had visited perhaps 300 times, a civilization that had just in the last century of their development begun to ask the questions that all civilizations eventually ask. The big ones, the ones with no clean answers. Why are we here? What is the shape of the universe? Is there something beyond what we can see? Are we alone? He had found over millennia of observation that the moment a civilization began asking those questions was the most interesting moment in their entire arc. Before that, they were just surviving. After that, they were just building. But in that specific window, that raw, terrified, electric moment of first cosmic awareness, they were something else entirely. They were reaching. And the Beyonder, who had spent his entire existence reaching towards something he couldn't name, felt something in that moment that was the closest thing to kinship he had ever experienced. He had been watching that civilization reach. When he felt it, not a sound, not a visual, not an energy signature or a spatial disturbance, or any of the conventional signals that cosmic entities use to track anomalies in the multiverse. Something beneath all of that. A structure, a coherence. Somewhere not in any direction he could conventionally name, not in any universe he had cataloged, not in any dimension or timeline or pocket reality his awareness had ever touched. Somewhere there was a system, and it was different from anything he had encountered before. Different not in scale, not in power, not in the way that new things in the Marvel Multiverse were different, variations on familiar themes, new arrangements of concepts he already understood. Different in kind. Structurally, fundamentally, architecturally different. Like hearing a piece of music and realizing it was composed using notes that don't exist in any scale you know. He stopped watching the civilization, turned his attention toward the source, and found the boundary. He pressed against it gently. This, for him, was almost unconscious, the way you lean toward something that catches your eye without really deciding to move. Pure reflex, pure interest. The boundary pushed back. Not aggressively, not as a warning. It pushed back the way a membrane pushes back. It was simply doing what it was designed to do, maintaining the integrity of what was on the other side. But what was on the other side? He pressed his awareness against the membrane carefully, trying to read the structure of it, and what he found made him more still than he had been in centuries. There were universes on the other side. 12 of them. Structured, hierarchical, maintained. Not by abstract forces, not by impersonal cosmic law, but by beings, specific beings assigned to specific functions, operating within a chain of authority that descended from a single point at the top. He had seen power hierarchies before. The Marvel Multiverse was full of them. But this was different. This hierarchy wasn't about power. It was about responsibility. Each layer didn't just exist above the one beneath it in terms of raw force. Each layer was accountable to the one beneath it in ways that the ones above couldn't simply override. Destruction was permitted but bounded. Creation was encouraged but monitored. Even the entity at the very top, the one his awareness brushed against and immediately, instinctively retreated from, because it was the first thing he had encountered in this cosmos that felt genuinely beyond his immediate comprehension. Even that entity operated within a framework. Xeno destroyed, yes. But Xeno destroyed within a structure designed to ensure that destruction served the whole. The Beyonder found this simultaneously fascinating and almost incomprehensible. In the Marvel Multiverse, power was power. The strong did as they wished. Even the most noble of cosmic entities operated primarily on their own authority, their own judgment, their own understanding of what was right. But here even the most powerful beings were functions. Pieces of something larger. Who, he thought, maintains this? Who holds it together? What kind of being understands this structure well enough to sustain it? He pressed his awareness gently further along the boundary, not trying to cross it, just reading it. And then he felt something that stopped him completely. Something had noticed him. Not the top of the hierarchy, not Xeno, not even the strange, towering presence he had identified as the Grand Priest. Something at the edge. Something that had felt him the moment he arrived, possibly before, and had been standing at the boundary ever since. Watching him watch. Patient, calm, ancient in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with depth. Not threatening, not afraid, just the present. The way a wall is present, the way a fundamental law of physics is present, not aggressive, not passive, simply, completely, unmovably there. And in the entirety of the Beyonder's existence, across every universe, every dimension, every cosmic entity he had ever encountered, he had never once felt anything quite like it. He pressed his awareness toward it. It didn't retreat. It didn't advance. It simply looked back. And in that looking back, in that calm, complete, utterly unimpressed return of attention, the Beyonder felt something new. Something he genuinely could not name. Not fear, he had never feared anything. Not awe, he was the source of awe, not its recipient. Something closer to recognition, the way you feel when you reach into the dark expecting nothing in your hand, find something solid. Something that was there. Something that knew it was there. Something that had been there long before you arrived and would remain long after you left. What are you, he thought, toward the presence at the boundary. The presence did not answer, but something in the quality of its attention shifted, barely, subtly, the way a maestro shifts their weight before lifting the baton. And the Beyonder understood in that moment that the question hadn't gone unheard. It had simply been filed, considered, placed in an order of things to be addressed at the appropriate time. Fascinating, the Beyonder thought, and stepped through the boundary. The moment he crossed, the sound of balance, that deep, perfect tone that only angels can hear, developed a crack, not a break, not a fracture, just a hairline imperfection. The kind that in the right material under the right pressure eventually becomes everything. Whis heard it. Of course he heard it. He had been listening for exactly that. He turned from the boundary to face the interior of Universe 7. And behind him, the space where there had been only void, was void no longer. Here is a specific, terrifying moment when two beings of genuinely incompatible magnitudes occupy the exact same space for the first time. It isn't documented in any sacred text, it isn't discussed in divine councils, and it is never, ever dramatic. That's the lie every myth tells. There is no shockwave, no atmospheric disturbance, no thunderclap, no bending of light, no visible rupture in the fabric of reality. There is just stillness. A suffocating, heavy stillness that is somehow louder than a supernova, the kind of quiet that makes your eardrums throb. It is the sound of two absolute systems crashing into each other and taking a fraction of a second to recalculate the math of existence. Whis did not turn around immediately. This was a choice. Every single thing Whis did was a choice, especially the things that looked like nothing at all. He stood with his back to the exact coordinate where the anomaly had bled through the boundary. His staff hung loosely at his side. His eyes were locked on the middle distance, casually monitoring the slow, violent drift of a nebula 400,000 light-years away. He gave the anomaly exactly 4 seconds. The exact same 4 seconds he had given himself when he first felt it at the border, a courtesy, a perfect symmetry, an acknowledgement that whatever was standing behind him deserved the exact same consideration Whis gave himself. Then he turned. Describing what the Beyonder looked like in that first second is almost impossible. Not because he was some geometrically impossible structure of blinding light that shatters mortal minds. He had chosen a form, a highly recognizable human form, young, male, dressed in a sharp white suit, the aesthetic of an entity who understood that presentation is a language and was trying very hard to speak it with a local accent. But the form was insufficient. It was a container that didn't quite fit the contents. You looked at the suit and the suit was fine, but the space immediately surrounding him refused to behave. Light didn't hit him right, it slid off his shoulders like water off oil. Distance completely broke down around him. He was standing exactly 30 feet from Whis, but in some fundamental, nauseating way that defied physics, he was also everywhere in Universe 7, simultaneously. He wasn't intruding, he wasn't imposing, he was just present. The way atmospheric pressure is present, the way absolute zero is present. Complete. And he was staring at Whis with the most genuinely curious expression the angel had seen in 10 billion years. It wasn't the curiosity of someone who wanted to take something. It was the wide, unblinking curiosity of someone who has just encountered the very first thing in a trillion lifetimes that they don't already fully understand. They just looked at each other. No words, no posturing, no explosive flares of aura or theatrical declarations of godhood. Just two entities occupying the same dirt, reading the code beneath each other's skin. Wys's mind snapped through the cataloging process in a microsecond. The presence was even larger up close, not physically. The suit was contained, larger in depth, like looking down into a puddle on the street and realizing you are staring into a bottomless oceanic trench. No origin point within the known multiverse, no energy signature matching any angelic template, no detectable threat, agenda, or objective. Just one single emotion, radiating off the white-suited man like heat from a dying star. Curiosity pure, total, unchained. The single most dangerous force in all of existence, wrapped in the most innocent motivation imaginable. Whis filed the data, He let the silence hang for one more second. Then he smiled. But the form was insufficient, like a word that doesn't quite contain its meaning. You looked at the form and the form was fine, but something around the edges of it, something in the space immediately surrounding it, refused to behave correctly. Light didn't land on him the way light landed on other things. Distance didn't apply to him the way distance applied to other things. He was standing approximately 30 feet from Whis. And also, in some fundamental way that had nothing to do with physics, he was everywhere in Universe 7 simultaneously. Not intruding, not imposing, just present, the way a temperature is present, the way an atmospheric pressure is present. Complete. And looking at Whis with an expression that was the most genuinely curious thing Whis had seen in 10 billion years. Not the curiosity of someone who wants something. The curiosity of someone who has just encountered the first thing in a very long time that they don't already understand. They looked at each other. No words yet, no posturing, no declaration of intent or display of power or any of the theatrical preamble that characterized most first encounters between beings of significant magnitude. Just two entities occupying the same space, reading each other. WH is, in those first few seconds, cataloged everything he could. The presence was even larger up close than it had felt through the boundary. Not larger in the physical sense, the form was the form, contained and deliberate, larger in the sense of depth, like looking at a still body of water and realizing there was no bottom. No origin point within any known system. No energy signature that matched any template in the angel hierarchies' accumulated knowledge. No detectable desire, threat, agenda, or objective beyond the one thing that radiated off him like heat from a star. Curiosity. Pure, total, unchained. The most dangerous force in existence, wrapped in the most innocent motivation imaginable. Whis filed all of this in approximately 1 second. Then he smiled. Not the polite, practiced smile he used with Beerus when the god of destruction was being particularly difficult. Not the patient, slightly resigned smile he used with Goku when the Saiyan was about to do something that would require Whis to reverse time. A genuine smile, small, almost private. The smile of someone who has just confirmed a suspicion that they weren't entirely sure they wanted confirmed. "You're a long way from home," Whis said. His voice was exactly what it always was, light, conversational, carrying an ease that had nothing to do with casualness and everything to do with absolute bedrock certainty in his own position. The Beyonder tilted his head. "I'm not sure I have a home," he said, "in the way you mean it." His voice was different, fuller somehow, like it was arriving from multiple directions at once even though he was standing in one place. Not unpleasant, just more than a voice normally was. "In the way I mean it," Whis repeated, as if tasting the phrase. "And how do you think I mean it?" "A fixed point," the Beyonder said, "a place of origin that you return to, a location within a structure that recognizes you as belonging to it." Whis considered this. "That's a reasonable interpretation," he said, "though I'd argue that belonging to a structure and being limited by it aren't the same thing." "I'd agree with that," the Beyonder said, and there was something in the way he said it, quick, almost eager, that told Whis this was not a being accustomed to agreeing with things. Not because he was contrary, but because agreement required the prior existence of someone worth agreeing with. He had been alone for a very long time. The space around them was doing something subtle and not entirely comfortable. Universe 7 in the immediate vicinity of the Beyonder's presence was adjusting, not breaking, not destabilizing, adjusting the way a room adjusts when something too large for it is brought inside. Whis felt it. Every molecule of structured existence in a 50,000 light-year radius was experiencing a very slight, very persistent pressure. Like the universe itself was gently trying to figure out what category to put this new arrival in, and finding that none of its existing categories quite fit. This was going to become a problem if the conversation went on long enough. Whis noted it, filed it, continued. "You felt me before I crossed," the Beyonder said. It wasn't a question, before I was even pressing against the boundary seriously. You felt me the moment I arrived at the edge." "Yes," Wise said simply. "How far out?" "Far enough." The Beyonder was quiet for a moment, processing this. The beings in my multiverse, the ones with the most developed cosmic awareness, they can detect presences at significant range. Eternity can feel disturbances anywhere within his domain. The living tribunal can perceive imbalances across the entire multiverse simultaneously. "That sounds useful," Wise said pleasantly. "You detected something outside your domain before it even entered," the Beyonder said. "Before it should have been detectable by any conventional means. That isn't range, that's something else." Wise said. "What is it?" Wise looked at him for a moment. That calm, measuring look that somehow managed to be completely non-threatening and absolutely penetrating at the same time. "Do you introduce yourself," Wise said, "before asking questions, where you come from?" The Beyonder blinked, and Wise filed that blink carefully, the slight surprise of someone who had genuinely not considered that the conversation might have a structure he should follow. Not rudeness, not arrogance, just the automatic assumption of someone who had, for most of their existence, been the only consciousness in the room. "The Beyonder," he said, "that's what they call me, in the universes I've visited." "What do you call yourself?" The pause. "I haven't decided," the Beyonder said quietly. It seemed presumptuous before I understood what I was. "And do you understand now?" Wise thought but did not say. Instead, Whis, attendant to Beerus, god of destruction of Universe 7. The Beyonder's eyes moved, a quick, instinctive scan of the Univ. Earths around them, looking for Beerus presumably, cataloging the power levels, the structures, the divine architecture. "Your god," the Beyonder said, "is asleep." "He usually is," Wise said. "You don't seem concerned." "Should I be?" "I just crossed the boundary of your universe," the Beyonder said, uninvited, without permission. "In most of the multiverses I've visited, that would prompt a defensive response from anyone responsible for maintaining order within it." "You're right," Wise said, "it would." He let that sit for a moment. "And yet," the Beyonder said. "And yet," Wise agreed. Another silence, this one different from the first. The first silence had been two beings reading each other. This silence was the beginning of something else, the first edge of genuine exchange. The place where two minds, having established that the other was worth engaging, begin to actually engage. "You're not afraid of me," the Beyonder said, not accusatory, genuinely puzzled. "No," Wise said. "You know what I am. You read me through the boundary before I crossed. You know the scale of what's standing in front of you." "I have a reasonable preliminary understanding, yes," Wise said. "And you're," the Beyonder searched for the word, "comfortable." "I wouldn't say comfortable," Wise said thoughtfully. "Comfortable implies the absence of concern. I have concerns, several actually. I've been cataloging them since you arrived at the boundary." "What concerns?" Wise tilted his head toward the space around them, that subtle atmospheric adjustment, the universe gently struggling to accommodate something it had no template for. "Your presence," Wise said, "is doing something to the fabric of this universe that isn't damaging yet but will become damaging if it continues long enough. Not because you intend it, but because you exist outside the parameters this universe was built around, and existence in a place you weren't built for tends to stress the architecture, even when you're trying not to." The Beyonder looked around, genuinely looking, not performatively, actually trying to see what Wise was describing. "I don't," he started. "You can't feel it," Wise said gently, "because from your perspective you're barely here, you're being careful, I understand that, but careful for something of your magnitude is still significant." The Beyonder was quiet. And then, to his credit, to the genuine credit of a being who had caused more incidental destruction in the Marvel Multiverse than most deliberate catastrophes, he pulled back. Not physically, internally, that vast, omnipresent quality of his presence, the everywhere-at-once quality that had been applying pressure to 50,000 light-years of Universe 7, contracted, pulled inward, condensed into something closer to merely large rather than all-encompassing. The atmospheric pressure in the universe eased. Wise noted this with the same small, private smile as before. Not because it resolved his concerns. Because it told him something important. The Beyonder could listen. He had learned something in his time in the Marvel Multiverse that his original nature hadn't included. He had learned, was still learning, that other things mattered, that his actions had textures beyond their immediate expression, that the world beyond himself deserved consideration. He had learned incompletely, imperfectly, with enormous collateral damage along the way. But he had learned, and that meant this conversation had a possibility that Wise had not been entirely certain of before. "Thank you," Wise said. The Beyonder looked at him with an expression that suggested he wasn't entirely sure what he was being thanked for. "You felt something was wrong and you adjusted," Wise said, "before I asked you to, before I explained what specifically needed adjusting. You trusted my concern enough to respond to it without requiring full information first." The Beyonder paused. "Yes. That," Wise said, "is rarer than you might think, even among beings considerably less powerful than you." He began walking, not away, just walking, the way Wise always walked when he was settling into something, the way some people pace when they think, except that Wise's version of it looked like a quiet stroll and accomplished 17 things simultaneously. "You said you have questions," Wise continued. "You crossed the boundary because you sensed something in this cosmos that you didn't understand, something structural, something about the way power and responsibility are organized here that didn't match your existing frameworks." The Beyonder moved with him, matching pace, present without crowding. "Yes. That was accurate," Wise said. "This cosmos is structured differently from what you've encountered before. The hierarchy here isn't primarily about power, it's about function. Specific beings assigned to specific cosmic roles that they don't simply hold, they are." "You're one of them," the Beyonder said. "I am an angel." "Yes." "What does that mean?" the Beyonder asked. "In this cosmos, what is an angel actually? Not the title, not the position in the hierarchy. What is it fundamentally?" Wise walked 3 more steps before answering. When he did, his voice was the same as it always was, light, conversational, easy. But the words were not. That, Wise said, is exactly the right question. He glanced sideways at the Beyonder. "And the answer is the thing that's going to be the most difficult for you to understand." "Why?" "Because understanding it," Wise said simply, "requires understanding something about existence that you have never personally experienced." The Beyonder looked at him. "What is that?" Wise's staff caught the light of a distant star, that ancient hum briefly audible, briefly visible, a vibration at the edge of perception. "Limitation," Wise said. And kept walking. The Beyonder turned the word over in his head the way a man rolls a strange, jagged coin across his knuckles, feeling the sharp edges, testing the unfamiliar weight, trying to figure out if it was currency he could spend or just a useless trinket to put in his pocket. He knew the concept, of course. Limitation was the defining trait of the Marvel Multiverse. It was the universal tax charged for the privilege of being real. Everyone paid it. Eternity was chained to his own domain. The living tribunal was paralyzed without a cosmic cause. Even the one above all, that vast, silent shadow at the absolute peak of the hierarchy, was boxed in by the logic of its own nature. Eventually, everyone hit a ceiling, a wall, a hard limit where the universe gently or violently reminded them that they were still trapped inside it. The Beyonder, he had never paid a cent. Not once, not ever. He had stepped into the Marvel Multiverse from the outside. He brought none of its rules with him, and he paid none of its costs. He moved through it like a hand gliding through a fish tank, present, disruptive, shifting the currents, but never actually getting wet. Never truly in it. And now Wise, this impossibly still, white-robed entity walking beside him through a universe that was currently sweating to recalibrate around his presence, was telling him that limitation wasn't just a side effect of existence. It was the bedrock. The Beyonder wanted to understand that. He wanted to pry it open, shove his hands inside, and feel the gears turning. He wanted to understand it by pressure, by contact. He didn't realize yet that this specific, greedy curiosity, was about to become a catastrophic problem. They walked in silence. The cosmos ground on around them. Stars burned out, gravity patiently choked dead planets. Somewhere in the middle distance, a world completed its 47,000th orbit around a dying sun, completely unaware that two entities whose combined weight dwarfed its entire galaxy were taking a casual stroll 300 light-years away. The Beyonder was thinking. Whis could feel it, that heavy, static electric quality of attention that happens right before a genuine question. The Beyonder wasn't just casually processing data. He was reorganizing it, taking everything he had felt at the boundary, throwing out his old models, and rebuilding his understanding of this new cosmos from the floor up. He's thorough, Whis noted, he doesn't assume. For something of his magnitude, that was remarkable. It was also terrifying. Because thoroughness in a being with absolutely no limits meant he wouldn't stop digging until he hit the bottom. And the bedrock of Universe 7 contained truths that weren't dangerous on their own, but were apocalyptic in the hands of something that lacked the natural friction of limitation. How do you explain a lock to something that has never encountered a door? Whis filed the thought away and kept walking. You said the hierarchy here is about function, the Beyonder said, the silence breaking like a snapped twig, not power. That is correct. But you can't separate them, the Beyonder countered. Function requires power to execute. The thing at the top of your ladder, the one you call Zeno, his function is erasure. His power is the direct, physical expression of that function. You can't separate what he does from what he is. True, Whis said, not missing a beat, but notice the order of what you just described. The Beyonder paused, his eyes narrowed slightly. His power serves his function. Rather than, Whis prompted softly. Rather than his function serving his power, the Beyonder looked up, mapping the stars. In my multiverse, it's the latter. Beings acquire godlike power and then they define their function around it. What they can do dictates what they decide to be. And here, Whis said, his voice smooth as glass, what they are required to be dictates exactly what power they are handed. The function precedes everything. Power is allocated in precise, mathematical amounts, not a drop more, not a drop less than what the job requires. The Beyonder stopped walking, and you maintain that, the angels, you maintain the precision of that allocation. Among other things, what happens when it falls out of alignment? I correct it. How? Whis finally stopped and glanced at him sideways. The calm in his eyes was absolute. How much detail would you like? All of it, the Beyonder said instantly. He lined in. The unguarded, desperate eagerness radiating off him was the most genuinely endearing and deeply alarming thing Whis had ever seen. The Beyonder was thinking. Whis could feel it, that specific quality of attention that preceded genuine inquiry. The Beyonder wasn't just processing information. He was reorganizing, taking everything he had felt through the boundary, everything he had read in those first moments of contact, everything in the brief exchange so far, and rebuilding his model of this cosmos from the foundation up. He was thorough, Whis noted. He didn't jump to conclusions. He didn't assume. For something of his magnitude, that was remarkable. And dangerous. Because thoroughness in something without limits meant that eventually the inquiry would go all the way down, past the surface, past the structure, into the bedrock of things. And the bedrock of things in this cosmos contained information that wasn't dangerous in itself, but was catastrophically dangerous in the hands of something that could act on it without the natural friction of limitation. How do you explain a lock to something that has never encountered a door? Whis thought this and filed it and kept walking. You said the hierarchy here is about function, the Beyonder said eventually, not power. That's correct. But the two aren't separate, the Beyonder said. Function requires power to execute. The being at the top of your hierarchy, the one you call Zeno, his function is erasure, and his power is the direct expression of that function. You can't separate what he does from what he is. True, Whis said, but notice what you just described. The Beyonder considered, his power serves his function. Rather than, Whis prompted. Rather than his function serving his power. A pause. In the Marvel Multiverse, it's mostly the latter. Beings acquire power and then define their function around it. What they can do shapes what they decide to be. And here, Whis said, what they are required to be shapes what power they're given. The function precedes everything. Power is allocated in precise amounts, no more, no less than what the function requires. And you maintain that, the Beyonder said, the angels, you maintain the precision of that allocation. Among other things. What happens when it falls out of alignment? I correct it. How? Whis glanced at him sideways. How much detail would you like? All of it, the Beyonder said immediately. With that eagerness again, that involuntary, unguarded reaching toward that was the most genuinely endearing and most quietly alarming thing about him. All of it. Of course. I'll give you a demonstration, Whis said, if something presents itself. It did almost immediately. Not because the universe was cooperative, not because Whis had engineered it. Because this was Universe 7 and Universe 7, left to its own devices, generated irregularities the way a spinning top generates wobble, constantly, naturally, as a function of its own motion. Specifically, approximately 230,000 light-years away, on the outer edge of a galaxy that Beerus had visited once about 4,000 years ago and considered destroying before finding something more interesting to eat, a star was doing something it wasn't supposed to do. Not a supernova, not a collapse, something subtler. A resonance cascade, a specific kind of gravitational feedback loop that occurred in massive stars under very particular conditions, where the star's own gravitational field began interfering with itself in a way that would, if left uncorrected, cause it to shed mass in a pattern that would destabilize the orbital mechanics of 11 inhabited planets in its system. 11 planets. Roughly 40 billion individual lives. Each one completely unaware that the light from their sun, which had risen and set over their civilizations for millions of years, was currently in the process of developing a structural problem. Whis felt it the moment it began. He always did. He didn't stop walking. Didn't announce it, didn't make a production of it, just raised his free hand, the one not holding the staff, and made a gesture so small it barely qualified as movement. A slight rotation of the wrist, a specific curl of the fingers, the kind of motion you might make when adjusting the volume on something. 230,000 light-years away, the resonance cascade in the star's gravitational field, a process that had been building for approximately 600 years, quietly, completely, and permanently stopped. The star continued burning. The 11 planets continued orbiting. 40 billion lives continued without interruption. The Beyonder had been watching Wys's hand. He looked at him now with an expression that was harder to read than his previous expressions, something between assessment and something deeper, something more personal. You didn't look at it, the Beyonder said. I didn't need to. You felt it from here. I feel everything in Universe 7 from here, Whis said, not boastfully, factually. The way you state that you can see with your eyes, that's part of the function. And you corrected it, the Beyonder said slowly. You didn't redirect the energy, you didn't suppress it, you corrected the underlying resonance, changed the fundamental pattern of the feedback loop at the source. Yes. That's not, the Beyonder paused. In my experience, corrections like that require either enormous force or precise knowledge. Usually force, because precise knowledge at that scale is... It's what the function requires, Whis said simply. Force would have solved the immediate problem and created 3 new ones. The correction needed to be exact, so it was exact. The Beyonder was quiet. You made it look effortless, he said. It was. Why? And here Whis paused, genuinely paused, not for effect, not as a conversational technique, but because the question, simple as it sounded, was actually pointing at something that required a careful answer. Because I've done it before, Whis said. 10 billion years of doing something develops a fluency that looks like effortlessness. But fluency isn't the same as ease. It isn't the same as power. It's the same as understanding. Understanding, the Beyonder repeated. The star wasn't a problem to be overcome, Whis said. It was a pattern that had drifted. I understand the pattern. I understand what it's supposed to look like. So correcting it was simply, he searched for the right word. Returning it, the Beyonder said. Yes, Wise said with a slight note of appreciation. Exactly that. And this is where it started. Not dramatically, not with any visible shift in the Beyonder's demeanor, not with any announcement or escalation. It started with a thought. A natural, almost inevitable thought for a being of his nature confronted with something he desperately wanted to understand. If I can feel the pattern, if I can read it directly rather than through observation, I'll understand it faster, more completely, more truly. This was how the Beyonder had always learned. Direct contact, direct access, reach into the thing and feel all of it at once. It had worked in the Marvel Multiverse, with mortals, with gods, with abstract entities, with cosmic forces. He had reached in, felt the shape of things, and understood them. It had caused damage sometimes, he was aware of that. But the understanding had been real. I raged. It was subtle enough that for a fraction of a second, Wise almost didn't catch it. Not an attack, not a violation, even not in any intentional sense. The Beyonder simply extended a thread of his awareness toward the pattern of Universe 7's underlying structure, that vast, precise, functional architecture that Wise maintained and that constituted the actual fabric of everything in this cosmos. He reached toward it the way you reach toward a piece of music to understand it better. The universe buckled, not catastrophically, not visibly, not in any way that 40 billion lives on 11 planets would have felt, but at the structural level, at the level of the fundamental pattern, something shifted in a way that was wrong. The way a single wrong note is wrong, not loud, not ruinous, but carrying a dissonance that, if it continued, would propagate through the entire composition. Wise moved. Not quickly, quickly would have implied reaction, and Wise didn't react. He responded, which was a different thing entirely, deliberate rather than reflexive, controlled rather than urgent. He placed his staff between the Beyonder's extended awareness and the structural fabric of the universe. Not as a weapon, as a boundary. A very clear, very specific, very final boundary. The Beyonder's awareness stopped. They looked at each other. Don't, Wise said. One word, completely without heat, completely without aggression, carrying no more emotional weight than a teacher correcting a student's grip on an instrument. But absolute. The Beyonder withdrew his awareness, immediately, completely, without resistance. I wasn't trying to damage it, he said. I know, Wise said. I was trying to understand it. I know that too. Then why? Because you're trying to understand it, Wise said, and the universe remaining intact are not compatible processes, not when the understanding is pursued your way. The Beyonder looked at the space where his awareness had been, at the staff that had stopped it, at Wise. My way, he said. Direct con. Act, Wise said, full immersion. You reach into the thing entirely, feel all of it at once, and extract your understanding from the inside out. He tilted his head. Yes. A pause, yes. It works, Wise said. I'm not suggesting it doesn't work. As a method of understanding, it's probably the most complete approach available to something of your nature. You understand things you've touched in ways that even I, with 10 billion years of observation, might not. But the Beyonder said. But Wise agreed, the things you touch don't always survive the touching. The Beyonder was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the universe continued its processes. The star that Wise had corrected burned steadily. The 11 planets orbited. The 40 billion lives went about their business. All of it intact. All of it continuing. Because Wise had placed a staff between an innocent gesture and a catastrophe. That's happened before, the Beyonder said quietly. In my multiverse, things not surviving. Yes, Wise said, I'm aware. The Beyonder looked at him sharply. You know about. I know about Battleworld, Wise said simply. I know about the secret wars. I know about the incursions and the things that preceded them and the reconstruction that followed. I know the shape of what you've done in your multiverse while trying to learn. How? Because the boundary between your multiverse and this cosmos is thinner than you might think, Wise said, and I have been standing at the edge of things for a very long time. The Beyonder processed this. He was used to being the one who knew things about others, who had read them, studied them, understood them before they understood him. This was different. This small, calm, ancient being in white robes had been aware of him, aware of his history, his actions, his nature, before he had even crossed the boundary. And had said nothing until now. Had simply waited, walked, demonstrated, let the conversation find its own shape. The Beyonder found this both deeply respectful and faintly unsettling. Respect because it meant he was being treated as something worth engaging carefully. Unsettling because it meant he had been, from the very first moment, in the presence of someone who already held information he hadn't given. Who had read him, and chosen deliberately what to do with that reading. You could have stopped me at the boundary, the Beyonder said. Could I? Wise said mildly. A pause. I don't know, the Beyonder admitted. Could you? Wise smiled, that small, private smile. What I could and couldn't do is less interesting than what I chose and chose not to do, don't you think? You chose to let me in. I chose not to prevent you from entering, Wise said. Those aren't the same thing. The distinction matters to you. All distinctions matter to me, Wise said. That's rather the job. The Beyonder looked at him, really looked, with the full depth of his perception rather than just its surface, and for the first time since crossing the boundary, he felt something that he hadn't felt in a very long time. Outplaced. Not overpowered, not threatened, not diminished. Outplaced. As if Wise were walking the same road, but had started earlier and gone further and knew things about the terrain ahead that the Beyonder was only beginning to glimpse. You let me in, the Beyonder said slowly, because stopping me would have been worse. Stopping you would have required force, Wise said. Force applied to something of your nature in this cosmos would have caused damage that would take centuries to repair, possibly longer. He walked 3 more steps, and more practically, stopping you wouldn't have addressed the actual problem. Which is? Wise looked at him directly, calm, complete, carrying 10 billion years of something that was not quite patience and not quite wisdom but lived in the space between them. You don't understand what you are, Wise said. In relation to other things, you understand your power, your scale, your history, but you don't understand what your existence does to the fabric of structured reality simply by being present within it. And you're going to tell me, the Beyonder said. I'm going to try, Wise said. Whether you're able to hear it is a different question. I can hear anything. You can receive any information, Wise said. That's not the same thing as being able to hear it. Hearing requires. He stopped walking, turned to face the Beyonder fully for the first time since they'd started moving. Hearing requires knowing what silence sounds like first, he said. And around them, as if the universe had been waiting for exactly this moment. Everything went quiet. Not literally, stars still burned, planets still moved. The vast mechanical symphony of Universe 7 continued without pause. But in the space between Wise and the Beyonder, in that specific, charged, cosmically significant 30 feet of existence, something settled, like a room before a confession, like the moment before the first note. The Beyonder looked at Wise, and for the first time since he had emerged from his own dimension into the Marvel Multiverse all those eons ago. He waited. Not because he had to. Because something in him, that ancient, wounded, searching something that had been reaching outward since before existence had a name, recognized that whatever was coming next was worth the stillness. There are things that angels know but never speak. Not secrets, not forbidden, classified knowledge locked away by some divine authority. It's nothing nearly that dramatic. It is simply a truth with absolutely no audience. When you are the one holding the cosmic scales, who exactly do you explain the weights to? Zeno doesn't need an explanation, he's the switch, not the circuit. Beerus doesn't want the explanation. He's a blunt instrument experiencing cosmic function as petty appetite and pride. And mortals literally cannot hold the explanation. The fragile architecture of their three-dimensional brains would violently fracture if you tried to force it inside. So angels know things, and angels stay very, very quiet. For 10 billion years, Whis had been quiet about the deepest, heaviest things, not because he was ordered to be, simply because there had never been anyone sitting across the table capable of surviving the conversation. Until right now. Standing in the dead space of Universe 7, walking next to an entity that existed entirely outside the system. A thing with no assigned function. A thing that answered to no one, needed nothing, and carried a wound so catastrophically old that it had warped the history of an entire multiverse. Whis realized for the very first time in 10 eons that he actually had an audience. Whether that was a rare gift or an apocalyptic mistake, he hadn't decided yet. He didn't speak immediately. It wasn't hesitation. Whis didn't do hesitation. It was the careful, icy pause of a surgeon staring down at a body, selecting the exact angle for the first incision, because the first cut determines every single thing that follows. He started walking again, slower this time, deliberate. The Beyonder fell into step beside him. Neither said a word. The universe ground on around them. Whis felt every agonizingly slow millimeter of it, stars collapsing, tectonic plates groaning, the subtle, desperate rebalancing of a cosmos just trying to keep itself alive. He let the ambient noise of existence inform what he was about to say, the way a master musician reads the acoustics of a dead room. Then he spoke. "Tell me what you are." The Beyonder didn't stop walking, he just looked at him. "You already know." "I know the data I've pulled," Whis said, his voice maddeningly smooth. "I want to hear how you say it out loud. There is a massive difference between what a thing physically is and what it actually believes itself to be. I find both highly informative." The Beyonder went quiet. The air around him seemed to drop a few degrees. "I am," he started. He chewed on the words like they tasted like ash. "Everything that existed before the multiverse, before that sprawling, bleeding structure you call Marvel even bothered to form, there was just a dimension, singular, infinite, and I was it." He stopped walking. He looked at his own hands, encased in the pristine white suit, as if they didn't belong to him. "I wasn't in it, I wasn't an inhabitant, I was the dimension itself, its substance, its brain, the absolute totality of it." Whis didn't blink. "Go on." He began walking again, slowly this time, deliberately. The Beyonder walked beside him. Neither spoke. The universe moved around them in its patient, continuous way, and Whis felt all of it, every process, every pattern, every subtle drift and correction and rebalancing that constituted the lived experience of a cosmos maintaining itself, and let it inform what he was about to say the way a musician lets the acoustics of a room inform how they play. Then he said, "Tell me what you are." The Beyonder looked at him. "You already know." "I know what I've read," Whis said. "I want to hear how you describe it. There's a difference between what a thing is and what it understands itself to be. Both are informative." The Beyonder was quiet for a moment. "I am," he said slowly, "everything that existed before the multiverse. Before the structure you call the Marvel Multiverse came into being, there was a dimension, singular, infinite, and I was it, not in it, not within it. I was the dimension itself, its substance, its consciousness, its totality." "Go on." "At some point, I don't have precise memory of the mechanism, only the fact a portion of that dimension became the multiverse, became structured existence. Universes and laws and beings and all the elaborate architecture of what you would call reality." He paused, and I remained. Outside it, watching it, trying to understand what it had become, what I had not lost, exactly, differentiated into. A part of my original totality had become something I could observe but no longer simply *B. Whis nodded slowly, walking, listening. "And so you went in," he said. "And so I went in," the Beyonder said, "to understand what the differentiated part had become, what existence within a structure felt like, what desire was, what limitation was, what it meant to be a specific thing rather than all things." "And did you understand it?" A long pause. No, the Beyonder said quietly. I learned about it. I accumulated enormous amounts of information about it. I witnessed it, reconstructed it, tested it from every angle I could conceive of. His voice carried something in it now, not quite grief, not quite frustration, something older than both. But understanding it truly from the inside requires being subject to it, and I am not subject to anything. That, Wise said, is the first true thing you've said since you crossed the boundary. The Beyonder looked at him. Everything else you've said has been accurate, Wise clarified, but accuracy and truth aren't always the same thing. That was true. That was the thing underneath all the accurate things. He let it settle. You cannot understand what you came here to understand because the understanding requires a cost you cannot pay. Limitation, the Beyonder said, the word from before, returning now with more weight. Limitation, Wise confirmed. He stopped walking. They were in the middle of open space now, no nearby stars, no planets, just the vast dark interior of Universe 7 with the distant light of galaxies in every direction like scattered embers. The kind of place that made mortals feel small and gods feel appropriately significant. Wise looked around at it for a moment with the expression of someone who genuinely loved what they were looking at, not the performed appreciation of someone acknowledging beauty. The deep, quiet, bone-level love of someone who had spent 10 billion years with something and still found it remarkable. Then he looked at the Beyonder and began. An angel, Wise said, is not a title. It's not a rank or a position or an honor bestowed for service. In your multiverse, I suspect the closest equivalent might be something like a fundamental force, gravity, electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear forces, not beings who apply the law, beings who are the law. But you have personality, the Beyonder said. You have preferences, you have this. A gesture that somehow encompassed the entire conversation. This specific quality of engagement, you're not impersonal. No, Wise agreed, and that's the part that even most beings within this cosmos misunderstand. They assume that function and personhood are in opposition, that to be a function is to be a machine, something without interiority. He shook his head slightly. An angel has complete interiority, complete personhood, every preference, every perspective, every quality that constitutes a genuine self, all of it present, all of it real. Then what makes you a function? Because every single one of those qualities, Wise said, is in service to something beyond myself, not by compulsion, not by external enforcement, but because at the deepest level of what I am, beneath the personality, beneath the preferences, beneath everything that you might point to and say that is wise, at the absolute bedrock of my existence, there is a purpose, a specific, non-negotiable, cosmically assigned purpose, and I am not separate from that purpose. I am that purpose, given form, given personality, given the specific qualities necessary to fulfill it with, he paused, finding the word, fluency. The Beyonder was very still. You don't experience it as constraint, he said slowly. The purpose, you don't experience it as something imposed on you that limits what you could otherwise be. How could I? Wise said, it isn't imposed on me. It isn't a cage built around something that existed before it. The purpose and I came into being simultaneously. I didn't exist first and then receive a function. I am the function. The Wise you're speaking to, this personality, this perspective, this specific way of moving through existence, all of it is the shape that this particular cosmic function takes when it needs to operate in a relational context. When it needs to talk to gods, the Beyonder said. When it needs to talk to gods, Wise agreed with a slight smile, and occasionally to things considerably more significant than gods. The Beyonder sat with this. Not literally, he didn't sit, but something in his presence settled in a way that had the quality of sitting, of weight being redistributed, of a being reorganizing itself around a new piece of information. This was the thing he had come here for. He could feel it. Not the complete truth yet, there was more, he could sense more underneath this, deeper levels that Wise was leading toward, but this was the beginning of it. The foundation of something that he had spent his entire existence circling without ever find. He had always understood power as the primary currency of existence. Power was what determined what you could do, and what you could do determined what you were. Even his own nature, that vast, infinite, systemless completeness, he understood primarily in terms of what it allowed, what he could do with it, what it let him access. But Wise was describing something where power was almost incidental, where the primary currency wasn't what you could do, but what you were for. And the Beyonder, who had never been for anything, who had spent his entire existence trying to find something to be for, felt that land somewhere very deep, and did not immediately know what to do with it. The gods of destruction, the Beyonder said, Beerus, his function is destruction, but you said the function precedes the power. So the function, the need for destruction, the cosmic role of it that existed before Beerus. Yes. What is destruction for, he asked, in this cosmos? What is its purpose within the structure? Wise glanced at him with something that might have been appreciation. The question was exactly right, the kind of question that cut straight to the architecture. Creation without destruction, Wise said, accumulates, it compounds. It builds and builds and builds without releasing, without making space, without the essential process of ending that allows beginning to remain meaningful. A universe that only creates eventually becomes so dense with the weight of its own existence that nothing new can find room to be, stagnation dressed as abundance. So destruction makes space. Destruction makes asterisk possibility, Wise corrected gently. Space is a physical description, possibility is the actual function. When Beerus destroys a planet, when any god of destruction performs their function, they're not just removing something, they're returning potential to the cosmos. That matter, that energy, that cosmic real estate, it doesn't disappear. It becomes available. It becomes the raw material of something that hasn't existed yet. And Beerus doesn't think of it that way, the Beyonder said. Beerus thinks of it in terms of whether something has impressed him or offended him, Wise said, with the particular tone of someone who had been managing exactly this dynamic for several billion years. Which is fine. The function doesn't require the functionary to understand it. A river doesn't need to understand hydrology to flow downhill. But you understand it. I understand all of it, Wise said. That's why I'm here. Beerus is the expression of destruction. I am the understanding of why destruction exists. When the expression drifts, when the function is being performed in a way that serves the personality rather than the cosmos, I correct it. Not by overriding Beerus, not by imposing, by guiding, adjusting, ensuring that the expression stays aligned with the function, even when the being performing the function doesn't know that's what I'm doing. The Beyonder was quiet for a moment. That sounds, he said carefully, like an enormous amount of responsibility to carry without acknowledgement. Something in Wise's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, but the Beyonder, with all the depth of his perception, caught it. Yes, Wise said, simply, without elaboration. And in that single word, unadorned and undefended, the Beyonder heard something he hadn't expected. Not complaint, not resentment, not the weight of a being exhausted by a burden too heavy. Just honesty. The flat, clean, unperformed honesty of someone naming a true thing without needing it to be anything other than what it was. Enormous responsibility, carried quietly, without acknowledgement. For 10 billion years. Yes, the Grand Priest, the Beyonder said. He's above you in the hierarchy. He's the father of the angels, yes. He is. Does he know, he paused, choosing words carefully. Does he know the depth of what you carry, the specificity of it, the fact that the entire functional architecture of Universe 7 runs through you? He knows his own function, Wise said, which includes a general awareness of all angels and their domains. Whether that constitutes knowing the depth of it, a slight pause, I suspect that's not a question he finds necessary to ask. Because angels don't need acknowledgement, the Beyonder said. Because angels don't need acknowledgement, Wise confirmed. But does that mean they don't deserve it? Wise looked at him. The Beyonder met that look steadily. I'm not asking rhetorically, the Beyonder said. I've spent a significant portion of my existence studying desire, need versus want, what beings require to function versus what they might flourish with. You don't need acknowledgement, you've established that clearly, but I'm asking something different. He paused. Does the absence of it cost you anything? The silence that followed was the longest silence of their entire encounter. Not uncomfortable, odd evasive, just real. The silence of someone sitting with a question that deserved more than a reflex answer. Perhaps, Wise said finally, that is a question for a different conversation. Perhaps, the Beyonder said, but I notice you didn't say no. Wise didn't respond to that. He began walking again instead, and the Beyonder walked beside him, and the universe moved around them. But something had shifted. The conversation had started as an examination, Wise explaining, the Beyonder receiving, teacher and student more or less with very clear lines. Those lines had just blurred. Not because the Beyonder had asserted power or forced a revelation, but because he had asked a question that Wise had not been asked before. In 10 billion years. Not once. And the asking of it, the simple, genuine, perceptive asking of it, had done something that all the cosmic force in the Beyonder's infinite arsenal couldn't have done. It had surprised Wise. Not destabilized him, not shaken him, not cracked the magnificent composure that was as much structural as personal. Just surprised him. And in the private interior of the being who maintained the balance of Universe 7, who corrected stars and guided gods and heard the sound of reality and kept it tuned. Something very small and very real. Acknowledged that it had been seen. They walked in silence for a while after that, a different silence from before. This one had texture, history, the specific quality of shared space between two beings who had, without entirely planning to, gone somewhere real together. Wise spoke first. You asked me earlier what an angel actually is, he said, fundamentally, beneath the title and the hierarchy. Yes. I've given you pieces of it, Wise said, the function, the purpose preceding the being, the way the personality and the cosmic role are not separate things but expressions of each other. He paused, but there's a deeper layer. Tell me. An angel, Wise said, is what happens when the universe decides that balance is too important to be left to impersonal law. The Beyonder waited. Gravity is a law, Wise continued. It doesn't care. It applies equally to everything within its domain, without consideration, without context, without the capacity to recognize when strict application would cause more harm than deviation. It is perfectly consistent and therefore sometimes perfectly wrong. Laws without judgment, the Beyonder said. Laws without judgment, Wise agreed. The cosmos required balance, and balance, it turned out, required something that law couldn't provide: judgment, context, the ability to recognize when the rules need to flex and when they need to hold absolute, when destruction should be permitted and when it should be quietly, invisibly prevented, when a civilization should be allowed to make its mistakes and when those mistakes would cascade into something that unravels the whole. And that requires a being, the Beyonder said, not a law. That requires a being who is deeply enough embedded in the system to understand it completely, every pattern, every rhythm, every tendency and drift and correction, yet personal enough to exercise judgment about it, not mechanical, not arbitrary. Wise looked at the stars around them. An angel is the cosmos's own self-awareness, given a specific face and a specific voice and a specific post to stand at. The Beyonder was very still. The universe knows itself through you, he said quietly. Through all of us, Wise said, there are angels in all 12 universes, each one the self-awareness of their particular domain, each one carrying the understanding of their cosmos the way he searched for the right image. The way a mind carries the understanding of a body, the Beyonder said. Wise paused, looked at him. Yes, he said, with something in his voice that was as close to genuine surprise as Wise allowed himself. Exactly that. And here is where the conversation arrived at the edge of the real thing. Not the thing about function or purpose or the balance between creation and destruction. The thing underneath all of that. The thing that Wise had never said aloud. Not because it was secret. Because it was the kind of truth that required the right listener. 10 billion years. And now in the interior of Universe 7, walking beside a being from outside every system. A being that had no function, no purpose, no assigned role, no cosmic reason for existing beyond the brute, magnificent, aching fact of its own completeness. Wise arrived at the edge of it, and looked at the Beyonder, and decided. There's something I need to tell you, Wise said, about what angels are, the deepest layer, the thing that isn't in any of the hierarchical documentation, any of the divine texts, any of the knowledge that gets passed between gods and mortals and cosmic entities. Yes, the Beyonder said just that. Angels, Wise said, are the only beings in this entire cosmos who know what it costs. Silent. What it costs, the Beyonder repeated. All of it, Wise said, the balance, the structure, the function of destruction and the function of creation and the maintenance of the space between them where existence actually lives. He paused. Every other being in this hierarchy experiences their function as power. Zeno erases, and the erasure is total, consequence-free, uncomplicated. The gods of destruction destroy, and the destruction is expression, appetite, identity. Even the mortals who grow strong enough to shake the structure, they experience their power as liberation, as expansion, as the joy of capability. And angels experience it differently, the Beyonder said. Angels experience it as weight, Wise said. Not burden, that word implies something unwanted, weight in the physical sense, the actual felt mass of consequence. We know what every correction costs, what every intervention prevents and what it allows. We know the 40 billion lives in that system I corrected. We know them not as a number, but as an asterisk reality that we are responsible for. We feel the universe the way a body feels itself. Every imbalance is a pain. Every correction is a relief. Every erasure that Zeno performs is felt by every angel in every universe as a loss that the system then has to absorb and rebalance around. The Beyonder looked at him. Zeno doesn't feel that, he said. Zeno feels nothing when he erases, Wise said quietly. It's not a criticism, it's his function. His function requires a certain distance from consequence, otherwise he couldn't perform it. The switch can't grieve every time it's flipped. But you grieve it. We asterisk register it, Wise said. All of it, every death, every erasure, every moment where the balance required a cost to be paid and something real was the currency. He paused. That's what I mean when I say angels know what it costs. We don't get to perform our function from a distance. We are embedded. We are inside asterisk it. And the weight of being inside it, of knowing all of it, of feeling the full texture of consequence. He stopped. Something passed across his face, fast, private, gone almost before it arrived. That weight, he said, is the thing that makes the judgment possible. You cannot exercise real judgment about something you don't feel the cost of. Law doesn't feel. Force doesn't feel. Only a being embedded deeply enough to feel it and composed stably enough not to be destroyed by the feeling can make the calls that keep this cosmos alive. The Beyonder was quiet for a very long time. Around them, Universe 7 continued, stars, planets, the slow breathing of a cosmos that had no idea it was being felt, fully and completely and at a cost, by the being walking through it. The Beyonder thought about his own existence. About the completeness that was his nature, the total absence of cost, every action taken without consequence to himself, every reality reshaped without the reshaping leaving a mark on him, every being studied and every universe tested and every experiment conducted and then walked away from, leaving him exactly as he had been before. Intact, unchanged, uncostly. He had thought for most of his existence that this was simply what power was. What being truly, fundamentally powerful meant, the ability to act without being acted upon, to change without being changed. But listening to Wise, feeling the specific, quiet, 10 billion year weight in those words, he began to understand something that rearranged the architecture of everything he thought he knew. The absence of cost wasn't power. It was distance, and distance was exactly why he had never been able to truly understand a single thing he'd ever touched. You feel the universes that Zeno has erased, the Beyonder said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Wise said. How many? Many. Do you, he paused, do you remember them? Wise looked at him for a long moment. Every one, he said. The weight of that was immense. Not because of the number, because of what it meant that somewhere inside this calm, composed, quietly brilliant being walking through the interior of Universe 7 was an accumulated archive of everything that no longer existed. Every universe that had been switched off. Every civilization, every life, every pattern of existence that had been part of the structure and then wasn't. All of it registered, all of it held. by the beings whose function required them to feel it, who had no choice but to fail it, and who performed their function anyway, perfectly, quietly, without acknowledgement. That, the Beyonder said, with a softness in his voice that hadn't been there before, is the bravest thing I have ever heard. Whis looked at him, and this time the surprise on his face was visible, clear, unguarded for exactly one moment before the composure returned. Brave, he said, as if testing the word. You carry what others are protected from carrying. The Beyonder said, not because you're stronger, because the system requires someone to carry it, and you do, without being asked to be grateful for the weight, without expecting anyone to understand it. He paused. That isn't function, that's... Don't, Whis said quietly. The Beyonder stopped. Don't what? Don't make it more than it is, Whis said. It is what it is. What I am is what I am. The meaning I find in it doesn't require external validation, and the cost of it doesn't require external acknowledgement. The moment I start needing it to be seen as something brave or noble or tragic is the moment the weight becomes a story I'm telling instead of a reality I'm carrying. The pause. Do you understand the difference? The Beyonder sat with that. Yes, he said finally. I think that might be the most important thing you've said. Whis said, and began walking again. Every conversation has a moment where it stops being a conversation. Not because it ends, not because the words stop coming or the participants run out of things to say, but because something underneath the exchange shifts, some weight transfers, some pressure that has been building in the substructure of the dialogue reaches a point where the architecture of the exchange itself can no longer contain it. And what was a conversation becomes something else. A reckoning, a collision, a moment where two beings stop circling the real thing and arrive at it. Whis had felt it coming for the last several exchanges. The Beyonder was processing, reorganizing, taking everything he had heard, the function, the purpose, the weight, the cost, the 10 billion years of embedded cosmic responsibility carried without acknowledgement, and doing what he always did with things he encountered. Trying to find the way in. Not maliciously, not even consciously entirely. It was simply his nature, the oldest, deepest, most foundational instinct of a being who had spent his entire existence on the outside of things looking in. Find the way in. Feel it from the inside. Understand it completely. And Whis, who understood the nature of things the way the universe understood itself, felt the moment the Beyonder stopped listening and started reaching. It began with a question. The Beyonder had been quiet for several minutes, that settling, reorganizing quiet that Whis had come to recognize as genuine processing rather than disengagement. Then, when you correct an imbalance, the Beyonder said, what does it feel like from the inside, not the mechanics of it, the experience? Whis considered this. Why do you ask? Because everything you've described about angels is structural, the Beyonder said, function and purpose and cosmic architecture, but you said angels feel it, that the weight is real, that the knowing is embedded and not distant. He paused. I want to understand the feeling, not the framework around it, the feeling itself. Understanding a feeling requires having felt something analogous to it, Whis said carefully. I'm not sure you have a reference point for what I'd be describing. Then describe it anyway. Let me build the reference point from the description. Whis looked at him. The request was reasonable, genuinely, articulately, carefully reasonable. Everything about the Beyonder in this moment was reasonable. Curious and attentive and present in that specific way, he had fully engaged, leaning in, every aspect of his vast awareness focused on the conversation. And yet, something in the quality of that focus had changed. Not dramatically, not in any way that would register to most beings as significant, but Whis operated at a level of perception where the difference between curiosity and hunger was detectable in the texture of attention itself, where the shift from receiving information to reaching for it was as clear as the difference between an open hand and a closing fist. The Beyonder was still asking questions, but underneath the questions, something had started moving. Correcting an imbalance, Wise said slowly, choosing to answer as if he hadn't noticed the shift, feels like resolution. You know the sound a string makes when it's been tuned to exactly the right tension, not too tight, not too loose, that specific, clean, complete note that tells you the instrument is ready. Yes, the Beyonder said. It feels like that, but in reverse. You feel the wrongness first, the detuned string, the note that's slightly off. It's uncomfortable in a way that isn't painful exactly, but is persistent, unignorable. The universe out of alignment has a texture to it that you can't stop being aware of until it's resolved. And then when you correct it, when the pattern returns to what it's supposed to be, Wise paused. The relief is complete, total. For a moment, everything is exactly right. Everything is in its place. The sound of balance is clean and full, and you can hear all of it without interruption. And then it drifts again, the beyond. Or said. And then it drifts again, Wise confirmed. Always, the universe is not a static system. It is a living one. It moves and changes and generates new patterns constantly. Some of those patterns drift toward imbalance, always have, always will. A slight pause, the work is never finished. Does that frustrate you? No, Wise said simply. A finished universe would be a dead one. The drift is the life. The correction is the function. The two together are the point. The Beyonder was quiet. Then show me. The word landed with a weight that was slightly different from its apparent simplicity. Not show me the way a student asks a teacher to demonstrate a technique. Show me with a quality underneath it that Wise recognized immediately. The Beyonder wasn't asking to observe. He was asking to access. Show you, Wise said, keeping his voice exactly as it always was. The feeling, the Beyonder said, the embedded awareness, the way you feel the universe. You described it as a mind feeling a body. I want to understand that from the inside, not abstractly, directly. And how would you suggest I show you that? Let me touch the pattern, the Beyonder said. Not the way I tried before. I understand now why that was wrong. Not with force or full immersion, just contact, a thread of connection, enough to feel what you feel when you feel the universe. Wise was quiet. You're asking me, he said, to let you into the angel's perception. Yes. Do you understand what that means? I'm asking because I don't, the Beyonder said, and there was something genuinely honest in that, the admission of ignorance from a being that almost never had to admit to it. You said understanding requires feeling the cost. I'm trying to find a way to feel it. I'm not trying to take anything. I'm not trying to absorb or replicate or use it. He paused, and in the pause was the entirety of his ancient, aching history. I just want to understand something real, for once. All the way through. And there it was. The wound. Ancient and total and so genuine that it made every careful calculation Wise had been running since the moment the Beyonder crossed the boundary feel suddenly, briefly, almost unbearably inadequate. Because the request wasn't power-seeking. It was loneliness. It was 10 billion years of being the only thing, the outside thing, the thing that could touch everything and understand nothing from inside. Finally, in this moment, in this universe, in the presence of the first being that had ever talked to him, as if he were genuinely worth understanding. Asking, just asking. Please, let me in. Wise felt it, felt all of it, because that was what angels did. And it cost him something in that moment to do what he knew he had to do next. No, Wise said. Gently, completely. The Beyonder looked at him. Not because I don't believe you, Wise said. Not because I think your intention is wrong. Your intention is exactly what you said it is. I believe that entirely. Then why? Because your intention and the consequence of acting on it are not the same thing, Wise said. What you're asking for access to the angel's perception isn't a feeling. It isn't a sensation that can be sampled and returned. It's an asterisk architecture, a specific, total, embedded way of existing in relation to a cosmos. You can't touch it without it changing you, and you can't change in that direction without. He stopped, looked at the Beyonder steadily. Without what? The Beyonder said. Without the cosmos changing around the changing, Wise said. You are not a bounded being. When you change, the change doesn't stay inside you. It radiates, it propagates. You are large enough and fundamental enough that a shift in your nature is a shift in the nature of the space you occupy. He paused. I cannot let you touch the angel's perception because I cannot predict, and I can predict almost everything. What a being of your magnitude experiencing that specific quality of embedded cosmic feeling, for the first time, without preparation or framework or the 10 billion years of gradual development that made it survivable for me. You think it would break me, the Beyonder said. I think it would break everything, Whis said quietly. You first, and then through you quite a lot else. The silence that followed was different from all the previous silences. Heavier, charged. Not with anger, the Beyonder wasn't angry. Whis could feel that clearly, no heat in it, no aggression. Just pressure. The specific pressure of a being who has been told no for the first time. Not the first time in this conversation, the first time perhaps in his entire existence. Because no requires an authority to enforce it. And until this moment in this cosmos, in the presence of this particular being, the Beyonder had never encountered an authority he couldn't simply step around. He didn't do anything dramatic. That was almost the most frightening thing. NG about what happened next. He didn't rage, didn't escalate, didn't make a declaration or a threat or a visible demonstration of the power that was sitting underneath every word he'd said since crossing the boundary. He simply raged again. Differently this time, not toward the structural fabric of the universe the way he had before, not broad and immersive and accidental in its scale. Precise, targeted, surgical in a way that suggested he had been, during all the walking and talking and listening, quietly mapping the exact location of what he wanted. He reached toward Whis. Not toward his body, not toward his power or his staff, or any of the visible external aspects of his existence. Toward the thing Whis had just described. The embedded awareness, the feeling of the universe, the angel's perception, that specific, total, 10 billion-year-old architecture of cosmic knowing that Whis carried the way a mind carries the knowledge of a body. He reached toward it with a precision and a gentleness that was, in its own way, more alarming than any force could have been. Because it was so careful. Because it was so deliberate. Because it was, in every way it was possible to be, respectful. And it was still going to tear everything apart. The effect was not immediate. That was the nature of it. The Beyonder's reach was careful enough, controlled enough, that the initial contact was almost imperceptible. A thread, a single point of access, barely there, like the tip of a needle finding the edge of a fabric. But Whis felt it. Of course he felt it. He felt everything. And what he felt in that moment was wrong, in a way that had no precedent in 10 billion years of feeling wrongness. Not the wrongness of an imbalanced star, or a drifting cosmic pattern, or a god of destruction operating outside his function. This was the wrongness of something reaching into the part of him that was not Whis the being, but Whis the function. The part of him that was the universe's self-awareness. The part that, if accessed from outside by something that existed beyond all systems, would not be understood. Would be unspooled. Because the angel's perception was not a power that could be sampled. It was a asterisk relationship. 10 billion years of relationship between a specific being and a specific cosmos. A relationship built through time and experience and the gradual, irreplaceable process of learning to feel something so completely that the feeling became structural, became part of what you were. You couldn't access a relationship from outside. You could only break it. Universe 7 reacted. Not with a shockwave, not with visible distortion or dramatic spatial collapse. With a sound. That deep, total, perfect sound that only angels could hear. Developed a fracture. Not a crack, not a break. A fracture. A network of fine lines spreading through the tone the way fractures spread through glass, each one small, each one on its own, survivable, but propagating, connecting, building toward the moment when the pattern of fractures reached critical density and the whole became something that had once been whole. Whis heard it, and moved, not quickly, beyond quickly, at a speed that had no relationship to the conventional physics of movement, not because he was breaking rules, but because at his level of function, the distinction between deciding to act and acting had been dissolved so completely by 10 billion years of practice that there was no gap between them. He didn't strike the beyonder, didn't push or block or intercept with force. He placed himself, his entire self, not just his body but the full presence of what he was, the complete architecture of his function, the 10 billion year weight of his embedded awareness, between the beyonder's reach and the thing it was reaching toward. Like a door closing, like a fundamental law reasserting itself, like the universe deciding, through the being that was its own self-awareness, that this particular thing was not going to happen today. The beyonder's reach stopped, not because Whis was stronger, but because Whis was asterisk specific. The beyonder's power was infinite but undirected, vast and complete, and capable of anything but not optimized for any particular thing, like an ocean. Wys's response was not power. It was asterisk precision. 10 billion years of understanding exactly what needed to happen, exactly when, in exactly what way, not a wall of force. A single, perfect, cosmically exact intervention placed at the exact point where the fracture would propagate if unopposed. Like a surgeon closing a wound that the ocean didn't even know it had opened. The fractures in the sound of balance stopped spreading. Held. Did not close, not yet, but held. Suspended at the point of almost. Universe 7, for one long moment, was a held breath. They stood facing each other. Not as they had stood before, two beings in quiet conversation, walking and talking and finding the shape of something together. His was different. This was the first moment since the beyonder crossed the boundary that the full weight of what they each were was present in the space between them, without the conversation to mediate it. The beyonder was enormous, there was no other word for it. With the conversational frame stripped away, with the careful, considerate, genuinely thoughtful engagement temporarily suspended, what remained was just the bare fact of what he was. Infinite, complete, without boundary or cost or limitation. Everything, and Whis, was a specific thing. Bounded, assigned, embedded in a particular cosmos with a particular function and a particular weight that he had been carrying for 10 billion years. Not infinite, not everything, but here, exactly where he was supposed to be. And in the specific geometry of this specific moment, in this specific universe, with these specific fractures suspended in the sound of balance. Exactly here was enough. Stop, Whis said. One word, the same way he'd said asterisk don't before. No heat, no aggression, no threat. Just complete. The beyonder looked at him, and in his expression was something that Whis had not seen there before. Not curiosity. Not the gentle eagerness of genuine inquiry. Something rawer than that. Something that lived underneath the curiosity. The thing the curiosity was in service of. The deep, old, foundational thing that had been there since before the multiverse, since before everything, when there was only one consciousness in all of existence, and that consciousness had no way of knowing what it was because there was nothing else to know itself against. Need. Pure, unperformed, aching need. Let me understand it, the expression said without words. Let me touch it. Let me feel what it is to be embedded in something, to be for something, to carry something real. I have been outside of everything for longer than your cosmos has existed, and I am asking to let me in. Whis looked at that expression for a long moment. Felt the weight of it. Felt the fractures in the sound of balance, suspended, waiting. Felt the 40 billion lives in the system with the star he had corrected earlier, continuing their existence in complete ignorance of how many times in the last several hours the architecture of their reality had been stressed and held and stressed again. Felt all of it, the way angels feel everything. That cost, and said with a gentleness that came from the same place as the firmness, from the same 10 billion year old understanding of what things actually were and what they actually required. I know, he said. Not stop again, not asterisk no. I know. Two words that were not a denial and not a permission and not a consolation and not a dismissal. Two words that were simply saying the thing the Beyonder had never been given. The thing that, it turned out, landed harder than any refusal could have. The reach withdrew, completely, immediately, without resistance. Not because Whis had forced it back. Because the Beyonder, for the first time in his existence, felt seen, and the feeling of being seen, of having the wound acknowledged not with pity or with analysis or with the detached cataloging of an observed phenomenon, but with genuine, costly, embedded understanding, was so unfamiliar and so total that everything else stopped. He didn't reach because he didn't need to reach. The reaching had always been in service of the seeing, and Whis had just given him the thing he had been reaching toward, without letting him touch anything that would break. The fractures in the sound of balance began slowly, carefully, and completely to close. Universe 7 exhaled. 40 billion lives continued. The star burned steadily, and in the interior of the cosmos, two beings stood facing each other in a silence that was not empty. That was, for the first time since the Beyonder had crossed the boundary. Full. After the almost, there is always a reckoning. Not punishment, not consequence in the punitive sense. Just the moment where the reality of what nearly happened settles into the bones of everyone present and has to be dealt with. Ignored reckonings become future catastrophes. Whis had spent 10 billion years ensuring that things were dealt with rather than ignored. He wasn't about to stop now. He didn't speak immediately after the fractures began closing. Neither did the Beyonder. They stood in the interior of Universe 7 and let the silence do what silence does after something significant. Let it absorb the residue of the moment, let the space between them recalibrate, let both of them arrive at the same place at their own pace, rather than being pushed there by the pressure of words filling the gap too quickly. The fractures were closing, but they were closing slowly. That was important information. In Wys's 10 billion years of maintaining the balance of Universe 7, fractures in the sound of balance had occurred before, not often. The cosmos was resilient. It had been designed to be, built with redundancies that most beings didn't know existed and couldn't access even if they did. A fracture wasn't a crisis. A fracture was a warning, a signal from the structure itself that something had pressed against it hard enough to leave a mark. But those previous fractures had closed quickly. Minutes at most, the structure reasserting itself, the redundancies engaging, the balance finding its way back to equilibrium with the practiced ease of a system that had been doing exactly this for billions of years. These fractures were taking longer, because they hadn't been caused by something within the system drifting out of alignment. They had been caused by something from outside the system, entirely making contact with the system's own self-awareness. The architecture didn't have a template for that. It was improvising its own repair. And improvisation, even in a cosmos as sophisticated as this one, took time. How bad is it? The Beyonder said, not a question, a statement that left room for an honest answer. Manageable, Whis said. That's not what I asked. The pause. Significant, Whis said, more significant than anything I've had to address in the last several thousand years, less significant than an erasure, somewhere in the middle of the scale of things I've corrected in my tenure here. He looked at the space around them, not searching, just present, feeling the texture of the slow repair. It will close completely. It will take longer than I would like. And there will be a period during the closing, possibly several decades, where the structural integrity of Universe 7 is operating below its standard threshold. What does that mean practically? It means the redundancies are engaged, Whis said. The system is more brittle than usual. Things that would normally be minor irregularities could become significant problems if they occur in the wrong sequence at the wrong time. It means I will be occupied, more than usual, for quite some time. He paused. It means the margin for error in this universe for the next several decades is considerably thinner than it was this morning. The Beyonder was quiet. "I'm sorry," he said. And the thing about those two words, said in that specific voice with that specific quality of weight behind them, was that they were not a social reflex, not the automatic apology of someone performing contrition, not even the genuine but somewhat theoretical remorse of a being acknowledging that their actions had consequences. They were the apology of someone who had just, for perhaps the first time in their existence, felt the full specific texture of what their actions had cost. Not in the abstract, not as a concept. In the slow, laborious closing of fractures, in the sound of balance of a living cosmos. In the thinning of a margin that 40 billion lives depended on. In the decades of additional weight now added to the load that Whis carried alone, without acknowledgement, because that was the function. The Beyonder had felt some asterisk of that. Not all of it, not the embedded, total 10 billion year version, but enough. Enough to make the apology real. Whis heard it as real. "I know," he said, the same two words as before, but different now. Less about acknowledgement of the need and more about acknowledgement of the weight, both true, both genuine, both the only response that was actually adequate to what was being expressed. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with physical depletion. It is the exhaustion of sustained precision. Of maintaining without break, without rest, without the relief of simply letting something slip for a moment, a level of exactness that the world depends on without knowing it depends on it. Surgeons know this exhaustion. Air traffic controllers know it. Parents of very young children, in the darkest hours of the night, know a version of it. Whis had known it for 10 billion years. And in the aftermath of the fracture, in the specific, depleting work of feeling the universe repair itself slowly while maintaining everything else that still needed maintaining, something in him that was usually perfectly contained became, briefly, visible. Not to most beings. But the Beyonder was not most beings. And he was paying a different kind of attention now. "You're tired," the Beyonder said. Whis looked at him. Not with surprise, exactly, but with the specific expression of someone who has been seen doing something they didn't intend to be seen doing and is deciding in real time whether to acknowledge it or redirect. He acknowledged it. "Yes," he said. "Not from the fracture specifically," the Beyonder said slowly, reading him the way he read everything with that total, careful, undivided attention. "From all of it, the fracture is the most recent thing, but the tiredness is older than that." "Tiredness is perhaps the wrong word," Whis said. "What's the right word?" Whis considered this for longer than he usually considered anything. Walking again now, that thinking walking that had become the rhythm of their conversation, and the Beyonder beside him, and Universe 7 around them slowly, painstakingly repairing itself. "Saturation," Whis said finally. "The right word is saturation. When you carry something long enough, at depth enough, you reach a point where the carrying isn't difficult anymore, but the space you have available for anything beyond the carrying becomes very small." He paused. "I have been carrying this cosmos for 10 billion years. I am not about to stop. I don't want to stop, but the space that isn't carrying," he let the sentence end there. "Is small," the Beyonder said. "Is small," Whis confirmed. "What's in it?" the Beyonder said. "The space that isn't carrying." Whis looked at him sideways. "What do you mean?" "You said the space that isn't the carrying is small," the Beyonder said. "I'm asking what's in it, what you use it for, what exists in the part of Whis that isn't Whis the function." No one had ever asked Whis this. Not Beerus, who was not incurious about Whis, but whose curiosity tended strongly toward himself. Not the Grand Priest, whose relationship with the angels was structural rather than personal. He knew their functions intimately, and their selves not at all. Not any of the mortals Whis had observed and occasionally interacted with. They were too busy being mortal, which was itself a full-time occupation, to think much about the interior life of the being managing the cosmos around them. Not anyone. The question sat in the air between them. And Whis, who had an answer for everything, found that he had to look for this one. Not because he didn't know. Because knowing and saying were, for this particular thing, a larger distance apart than they usually were. Aesthetic appreciation, he said finally. I find genuine pleasure in the elegance of things, the specific elegance of a well-executed function. When Beerus makes a decision that is not just powerful but right, timed correctly, proportionate, serving the cosmic purpose of destruction without exceeding it, I find that genuinely beautiful. When a mortal solves a problem in a way that their species hasn't encountered before, using only what they have available, he paused, and something in his voice warmed slightly. I find that remarkable. Every time. Mortals impress you, the Beyonder said. Mortals operate under constraints that would break most gods, Wise said, with a quiet conviction that was clearly not a new opinion. Limited lifespan, limited power, limited knowledge, limited time, and within those constraints they produce art, philosophy, love, mathematical frameworks that describe the behavior of the universe more precisely than most divine entities could articulate. They build things that outlast them. They care about things that have nothing to do with their own survival. He shook his head slightly. Yes, mortals impress me, consistently and without diminishment across 10 billion years of observation. What else? The Beyonder said, genuinely wanting to know, not pressing asking. The difference was clear now. Food, Wise said. The Beyonder blinked. Food, he repeated. The sensory experience of well-prepared food is one of the most concentrated forms of mortal ingenuity in existence, Wise said, with a composure that somehow made the statement feel completely serious. Every dish is a solution to a problem, the problem of sustenance, that has been so thoroughly oversolved that it has become art, the specific art of making something necessary into something transcendent. A pause. I find that instructive as well as enjoyable. The Beyonder looked at him for a long moment. And then, for the first time since crossing the boundary, for possibly the first time in a very long time, he laughed. Not loudly, not performatively, a real laugh, small and surprised and genuine. Wise looked at him. What? Wise said mildly. Nothing, the Beyonder said, still with the remnants of the laugh in his voice. I've been in the presence of cosmic entities, abstract forces, omnipotent beings of every conceivable description. I've witnessed the birth and death of universes. I've had conversations that reshaped the architecture of reality. He paused. And I have never heard anyone say food in that tone of voice before. It's a legitimate tone of voice for the subject, Wise said. It absolutely is, the Beyonder said, and the warmth in his voice was so complete and so unguarded that it briefly changed the quality of the space around them. Not cosmically, not structurally, just personally, the way a room changes when something genuine happens in it. This is the thing that doesn't make it into the stories about beings of cosmic magnitude. The moments between the vast and terrible things. The moments where something ancient and enormous finds in the middle of a conv. Ursation about the deepest questions of existence, a pocket of something small and real and warm. The laugh, the food, the specific, unpredicted, completely human-scaled moment of genuine amusement between two beings whose combined significance exceeded the comprehension of every civilization in every universe. These moments matter, perhaps more than the vast and terrible things, because the vast and terrible things define what beings are capable of. But these moments define what they actually are. The warmth didn't last long. Not because it was false, it was real, and both of them knew it was real, and there was value in the knowing, but because there was a reckoning still unfinished, and Wise didn't leave reckonings unfinished. There's something you need to understand, Wise said, when the warmth had settled into the conversation rather than sitting on top of it. About what happened, about what you reached for and why you can't have it. The Beyonder's expression shifted, present, serious, willing. Tell me, he said. You reached for the angel's perception because you wanted to understand what it felt like to be embedded, Wise said. To be in relationship with a cosmos, to carry the weight of something real. He paused. That want is legitimate, I'm not questioning it, but I need you to understand why it's impossible, not just practically, fundamentally. Because I'm not bounded, the Beyonder said. Partly, Wise said, but the deeper reason is this. He stopped walking, turned to face the Beyonder with that direct, complete, fully present attention. The angel's perception isn't a power that I possess. It isn't something that lives in me the way a skill lives in a being. It is the result of an asterisk relationship asterisk that was built across 10 billion years. Every correction made, every imbalance felt and addressed, every universe that no longer exists remembered. Every moment of saturation and exhaustion and the specific small pleasures that make the saturation survivable. He paused. It is not a thing, it is a history, and you cannot acquire a history by touching it. The Beyonder was very still. You can only build one, he said slowly. You can only build one, Whis confirmed, and building one requires time, the Beyonder said. Time, Whis agreed, and limitation, because history requires the possibility of loss. Every moment in a history only means asterisk something because other moments were sacrificed to get there, because the being accumulating the history is mortal enough or bounded enough that the time costs something, that the choices have weight, that the corrections matter because the corrections could have failed. He looked at the Beyonder steadily. For you, Whis said, nothing costs anything. Every moment is equally available, every choice can be revised, every consequence can be stepped back from, and this means... I can't build a history, the Beyonder said. The words came out quiet, heavy, not with self-pity, there was none of that in him, just with the specific weight of a truth landing completely. I can accumulate information across time, but accumulation isn't history. It doesn't asterisk mean the same thing. No, Whis said, it doesn't. The silence that followed was the darkest silence of the entire encounter. Not because anything terrible was happening. Because something true was being fully absorbed. The Beyonder stood in the interior of Universe 7, a cosmos that was slowly repairing the damage his reaching had caused, a cosmos he could not be embedded in, could not build a history within, could not carry the weight of because the carrying required the possibility of being broken by the weight, and he could not be broken. And felt the full shape of the thing he could not have. Not a power, not a cosmic function. Something smaller and more foundational than both. A place, a specific place in a specific structure that recognized you as belonging to it. Not because you were strong enough to claim it. Because you had been there long enough and paid enough and given enough of yourself to the work of maintaining it, that you and the place had become inseparable. He had crossed the boundary of this cosmos hoping to find the truth about what it meant to be for something. And he had found it. And it was the one thing in all of existence that his infinite, boundless, uncostly nature could not provide him. You cannot buy belonging. You cannot touch your way into it. You can only earn it. Through time, through cost, through the long, unspectacular, unglamorous, unremarked work of being exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you're supposed to do, feeling the full weight of all of it. Day after day after day. For 10 billion years. Or one. Or whatever measure of time you have available. The duration wasn't the point. The cost was the point. And the Beyonder who could not be cost, who could not be diminished or depleted or changed by anything he encountered. Still, in the interior of someone else's belonging. And understood completely for the first time what he was and what he wasn't. I've been asking the wrong question, the Beyonder said. Whis waited. Every time I've entered a universe, every experiment, every test, every time I reached in and tried to understand something. His voice was quiet, not broken, nothing about him broke, but different, the specific quality of different that comes from the inside of something shifting. I was asking, what does this feel like? I thought if I could feel enough things, touch enough things, understand enough things from the inside, I would eventually understand what I was missing. But feeling requires the possibility of not feeling, Whis said quietly. The contrast, the Beyonder said, yes, I understand that now. You can't know warmth if you've never been cold. You can't know belonging if you've never been lost. He paused. I can't be cold, I can't be lost. I can touch cold things. I can observe lost beings, but the experience itself, he stopped, is always on the other side of a boundary you can't cross, Whis said. Not because it's locked, the Beyonder said, slowly, arriving at something. but because crossing it would require me to be something I'm not. Yes, Wise said, and I can't be something I'm not. No one can, Wise said. That's not a limitation specific to you. Every being in every cosmos is what they are. The difference is that most beings exist within a structure that gives their specific nature a function, a purpose, a place where what they asterisk or asterisk is exactly what's needed. He paused. You exist outside every structure. Your nature has no assigned function, no designated place. That's the wound, the Beyonder said, not asking. That's the wound, Wise confirmed. And there's no correction for it, the Beyonder said. The way you correct a drifting star, there's no gesture that returns me to alignment because I was never in alignment. I was never asterisk in asterisk anything. Wise was quiet for a moment. I didn't say that, he said carefully. The Beyonder looked at him. I said I couldn't give you access to the angel's perception, Wise said. I said you couldn't acquire a history by touching it. I said belonging can't be bought or forced. He paused. I didn't say it was impossible for you. I said it couldn't be gotten asterisk your asterisk way. Then what way? The only way anything real is ever gotten, Wise said. He looked at the Beyonder with the full weight of 10 billion years in his eyes, not heavily, not dramatically. With the same lightness he carried everything, but underneath the lightness, the full specific gravity of something that had cost enormously and was worth every bit of the cost. By choosing something, Wise said, and staying. The words landed in the silence. Simple, complete, carrying more weight than any cosmic pronouncement, any divine declaration, any omnipotent demonstration of force. By choosing something. I'm staying. The Beyonder turned the words over the way he had turned limitation over at the beginning. But differently now. Not with the analytical curiosity of a being cataloging a new concept. With the specific, almost unbearable attention of someone who has just been handed something that might, if they're careful enough with it, change everything. Okay, not to someone else's luck. To a door he hadn't known he could build. The fractures in the sound of balance continued their slow, laborious closing. Universe 7 breath. The star burned. 40 billion lives continued. And Wise stood in the interior of his cosmos, saturated, tired in the way that had no adequate word, carrying the weight of 10 billion years plus the additional weight of the last several hours, and felt something he hadn't expected to feel today. Not relief, not satisfaction, something quieter than both. The specific feeling of having given something real to someone who genuinely needed it. Not a power, not a cosmic truth, just a direction, pointed at by two words. By choosing something. I'm staying. It wasn't a solution. It was a beginning. And beginnings, in Wise's experience, were always worth more than solutions. Because solutions ended things. Beginnings opened them. There's a moment in the life of every being, mortal, divine, cosmic, or otherwise, where they arrive at the edge of what they are and have to decide what to do next. For mortals, this moment usually comes wrapped in crisis, loss, failure, the specific, humbling, occasionally devastating experience of encountering the boundary of your own capacity and finding that the boundary is real. For gods, it comes less often but hits harder. Gods are built with the assumption of sufficiency. They are what they are, and what they are is supposed to be enough. When they find the edge, the finding tends to shatter things. For cosmic entities, beings whose existence spans multiverses, whose awareness encompasses realities beyond counting, whose power exceeds the conceptual frameworks of everyone below them, this moment almost never comes at all. Almost, because every now and then, in the vast and improbable sweep of existence, something happens that even the most complete and infinite and boundless of beings couldn't have prepared for. They meet something that reflects them. Not their power, not their history, not the accumulated weight of everything they've done and everywhere they've been. Their nature, the specific, irreducible, foundational thing that they are underneath all of that. And in the reflection, for the first time, they see it clearly. The Beyonder had been reflected by a calm, white-robed, 10-billion-year-old angel standing in the interior of a universe he had nearly fractured, who had said 2 words, and waited. They stood in silence for a long time after that. Not the silence of impasse or avoidance or the absence of things to say, the silence of 2 beings who had said enough, who had arrived together at a place that words had brought them to, and now words could only crowd. The Beyonder was looking at the universe around him. Not with the scanning, cataloging attention he had used when he first crossed the boundary, that instinctive reach toward full comprehension, toward feeling the shape of everything at once. He was looking differently now, the way you look at something when you've stopped trying to possess the understanding of it and started simply looking. At the stars. At the slow, vast, patient motion of galaxies, maintaining their relationships with each other across distances that made the concept of distance feel slightly absurd. At the thin, shimmering evidence of life on 100,000 planets, visible if you knew how to look, the specific, organized complexity that distinguished a world with something living on it from a world that was just chemistry and geology going about their business. At all of it, happening, continuing. Indifferent to observation in the most beautiful possible way, not because it was cold or uncaring, but because it was sufficient unto itself. It didn't need to be watched to be real. It was real because it was real, because the function of it was its own justification. Because 10 billion years of balance maintained by a being standing quietly at its center had given it the structural integrity to simply continue. It's remarkable, the Beyonder said. His voice was different. Not dramatically, not in any way that would be immediately obvious, but Whis heard it, heard the specific quality of different in it, and filed it carefully. The fullness was still there, the multiple directions quality of a voice arriving from everywhere at once, but underneath it, or perhaps threaded through it, something had changed. Something had been added that hadn't been there when he crossed the boundary. Weight, not the crushing, foundational, 10 billion year weight that Whis carried. The first small, specific, real weight of a being who had just encountered something it couldn't simply move through. Yes, Whis said, it is. You've been looking at it for 10 billion years, the Beyonder said. Does it still look remarkable to you? Every time, Whis said, without hesitation. The Beyonder turned to look at him. How, he said, not skeptically, with genuine need to understand. Because I feel it, Whis said, not just observe it. Every correction I make, every drift I address, every imbalance I return to alignment, I feel it. Which means I'm always in contact with the specific texture of this universe, its particular quality, the specific asterisk Ys of Universe 7 that no other universe has exactly. The way a musician knows their instrument, not just the notes it can produce, but the specific resonance of this instrument, the way it responds to this asterisk touch, the history of every piece that has ever been played on it leaving something in the wood. He paused. You can't be bored by something you're in relationship with. Relationship is always in motion, always producing something new. The remarkable thing isn't the universe itself, it's the fact that it's always becoming what it is. The Beyonder was quiet. Relationship, he said. Yes. By choosing something and staying, he said slowly. That's what you mean, not just the physical staying, the relational staying, the choosing to remain in contact with something, to let it affect you, to carry the weight of it. That's what builds the history. That's what builds everything real, Whis said. The fractures in the sound of balance had been closing for hours now. Not fully closed, not yet, but significantly reduced. The hairline network that had spread through the tone of the cosmos had contracted to a handful of specific points, each one slowly being absorbed back into the structure as the universe's self-repair engaged the redundancies, and the redundancies engaged the deeper architecture, and the deeper architecture did what it had been designed. Die to do. Endure. Whis felt all of it. The slow, effortful, deeply satisfying process of a cosmos healing itself. Like feeling a bruise fade. Like hearing a detuned string find its note. He let himself feel the satisfaction of it completely. Because the moment was earned. And earned moments deserved to be felt. I need to ask you something, the Beyonder said. Yes, Wise said. You said angels are the only beings in this cosmos who know what it costs. He paused, the balance, the structure, the function of everything. Another pause. You carry that, all of it, 10 billion years of it. He looked at Wise with an expression that was entirely new, not the curiosity that had characterized most of their conversation, not the raw need that had surfaced at the fracture point. Something that had the quality of both but was neither. Something that was witnessing. The specific attention of a being that has decided to actually see something rather than merely observe it. Does anyone in this cosmos know what you carry? Wise looked at him. You asked me a version of this before, he said, whether the absence of acknowledgement costs me anything. And you didn't say no, the Beyonder said. You said ***, perhaps that's a question for a different conversation. I remember. Is this a different enough conversation? 10 billion years. In 10 billion years, no one had asked Wise what he carried in a way that required a real answer. Beerus was aware in the general way that Wise managed things, corrected things, kept the universe running with a smoothness that Beerus benefited from without examining. But Beerus's awareness was the awareness of someone who sleeps soundly because they know, without thinking about it, that the house is being watched. He didn't know the specifics of the watching. He didn't need to. The Grand Priest knew the function, knew the scope of it, understood the architecture of what each angel carried in the abstract. But the Grand Priest was not a being given to asking whether the carrying was fine. The carrying was the function. The function was what angels were. Whether it was fine was not a question the structure asked of its own components. And the mortals that Wise had watched and occasionally interacted with, and in his private interior, found genuinely remarkable. The mortals didn't know enough to ask. So no one had asked. For 10 billion years. Until now. Until this being, this infinite, boundless, uncostly, systemless being from outside every structure, who had come here looking for something he couldn't name and found something he hadn't expected and nearly fractured a cosmos trying to touch it, and then pulled back when he was seen. With the specific attention of someone who genuinely wanted to know, and was willing to hold whatever the answer was. Wise was quiet for a long moment. Not calculating, not selecting the right entry point. Just deciding whether to say the thing he had never said. Whether this was the conversation, whether this was the moment, whether this being standing in the interior of his cosmos, who had no function and no place and no assigned purpose, but who had, in the last several hours, demonstrated a capacity for genuine attention and genuine restraint and genuine shift that Wise had not seen in many beings across 10 billion years of observation. Whether he was the right audience. For the thing angels didn't say. Wise looked at him and decided. No, he said. Simple, clear, the first fully unguarded thing he had said since the conversation began. No one in this cosmos knows what I carry, Wise said. Not completely. Beerus knows a surface version. The Grand Priest knows the structural version. But the actual, specific, felt experience of carrying the self-awareness of Universe 7 for 10 billion years, the weight of every correction, every erasure felt from the inside, every mortal civilization watched from birth to extinction, every moment of saturation where the space that isn't the function is so small that you have to remind yourself it exists, he paused. No one knows that. The Beyonder listened. Completely without moving, without the instinctive reaching that had characterized so much of his attention earlier, just present, open, holding the space for what was being said. It is, Wise said, and the words came slowly, chosen with a precision that had nothing to do with performance and everything to do with the specific difficulty of saying true things about yourself to someone who is actually listening. The most isolating thing I know. Not the work. The work is the point. The work is what I am, and I wouldn't have it otherwise. But the carrying it without anyone knowing the specific shape of it. Without anyone who could, even theoretically, understand the full texture of what it is. He paused. Angels don't speak about this, he said, not to each other, not to the gods we attend, not to anyone, not because. We're forbidden because there's never been a point, no one has ever been, he searched. Able to hold it, the Beyonder said quietly. Able to hold it, Wise agreed, without it becoming something other than what it is. Every being within the system would either minimize it, it's just function, it's what you're for, or overdramatize it, make it a tragedy, make me a martyr, neither of which it is. He looked at the Beyonder. It's just true. It is simply what is true about what I am. And true things deserve to be said to someone who can hear them as true, without agenda. Without reaction that reshapes them into something easier to process. And you've been waiting 10 billion years for that someone, the Beyonder said. Wise looked at him. Something passed across his face. Not the small private smile, not the composed, managed expression of the universe's self-awareness navigating a complex situation with the practiced ease of 10 billion years. Something more unguarded than either of those. Something that was, briefly and completely, just Wise. I didn't know I was waiting, he said quietly, until just now. The silence that followed was the most complete silence of the entire encounter. Not heavy, not charged, not loaded with unsaid things or approaching climax. Just full. Two beings in the interior of a slowly healing cosmos. One who had been carrying everything alone for 10 billion years and had just, for the first time, put a small piece of it down. Not permanently, not as abdication or relief, or the dramatic unburdening of a being finally freed from a weight. Just put it down for a moment. In the presence of someone who could hold it. And feel it. At cost. Even if the cost was small. Even if it lasted only as long as this conversation. It had happened. It was real. And real things, once they exist, cannot be made to not have existed. Even by omnipotence. The Beyonder broke the silence gently. I came here, he said, because I sensed something in this cosmos I couldn't categorize, something about the way power and responsibility were organized here that didn't match my existing frameworks. He paused. I thought I was coming to understand a structure. And instead, Wise said. And instead I found out what I am, the Beyonder said. What I actually am, not in terms of power or origin or cosmological classification. He looked at the universe around them, that genuine, non-acquisitive looking that had replaced the earlier cataloging. I am a being that has never chosen anything. Every multiverse I've entered, every test I've constructed, every being I've studied, I moved through all of it the way weather moves, present, influential, unchosen and unchoosing. Just happening. And now, Wise said. And now I understand that happening isn't the same as being. He paused. Being requires choice, sustained choice. The decision to be here specifically, in relationship with this specifically, and to stay in that relationship long enough for it to become something that has weight. By choosing something, Wise said. And staying, the Beyonder completed. Here is the thing about the Beyonder that the Marvel Multiverse had never managed to fully reckon with. He was not a villain. He was not even, in any meaningful sense, an antagonist. He was a beginning that had never found its story. A consciousness of infinite magnitude that had existed since before existence, without ever having something to be infinite for. Every test, every experiment, every dramatic cosmic intervention that had caused so much damage in the Marvel Multiverse, it wasn't malice. It was a beginning trying to find the thing that would make the infinity mean something. Trying to find, in the structure of other existences, the shape of what his own existence was supposed to be. And failing, not because he was broken, because he was looking in the wrong place. You don't find the meaning of your existence in someone else's structure. You build it. In the specific, unglamorous, costly, real way that Wise had spent 10 billion years demonstrating without knowing anyone was watching closely enough to learn from it. The Beyonder had been watching, and finally seeing. I can't stay here, the Beyonder said, in this cosmos, you understand that? I understand that, Wise said. Your presence here, even contained, even at your most careful, continues to stress the architecture. The fractures will close completely only after you've gone. I know, he looked at Wise, I'm sorry for the damage. You've said that, Wise said. I know I'm saying it again because the first time I said it I was sorry in the abstract. Now I'm sorry in the specific. He paused. I can feel the difference. Whis looked at him steadily. Yes, he said, you can, that's new. It is, the Beyonder said. He paused, searching for the word with a care that was itself new, the care of a being who had previously had infini. Words available and now understood that having infinite words wasn't the same as having the right asterisk one. Heavy, he said finally, it's heavy. The specific feeling is I can feel the decades of additional work I've given you, the thinning of the margin, the 40 billion lives that are now more exposed than they were this morning. He paused. I can feel it, not the way you feel it, not embedded, but adjacent to it, close enough to be real. That, Whis said quietly, is the beginning of cost. Yes, the Beyonder said. It will fade when you leave, Whis said. The connection to this cosmos will attenuate as you move away from it. The feeling will diminish. I know, the Beyonder said. Does that concern you? The pause. It concerns me that I want to hold on to it, the Beyonder said. The heaviness, because it's the first thing I've felt that was genuinely mine, not observed, not borrowed from someone else's experience. Mine, produced by something I did in a specific place to a specific thing that I will carry as a specific memory. He looked at Whis. I don't want it to fade. Then don't let it, Whis said simply. How do I? Choose something, Whis said, something in your own multiverse, something specific, something that requires your attention and your restraint and your presence rather than just your power, and stay with it. He paused, not as a test, not as an experiment, not as a way of acquiring understanding, just stay, because you've chosen to, because the choosing matters more than what you get from the staying. And eventually, the Beyonder said slowly, the staying builds something. Eventually, Whis said, the staying is asterisk something, the history, the relationship, the weight. He paused, the belonging. The Beyonder was quiet for a very long time. The universe moved around them. The fractures continued their slow closing. Somewhere a star burned steadily over 11 planets, where 40 billion lives continued in complete, peaceful ignorance of how much had happened in the last several hours in the space between the spaces they would never see. Thank you, the Beyonder said finally. Not for the conversation, not for the access or the explanation or the cosmic truths exchanged. For the thing underneath all of that. The saying. The being told by someone with no agenda and no reason to perform it, and every reason to simply manage the situation efficiently and move on, being told I know by someone who genuinely did. Whis inclined his head slightly. Not in deference, in acknowledgement. Equal to equal. Two different kinds of infinite, standing in the interior of a healing cosmos, having arrived somewhere neither of them had expected to arrive. The Beyonder prepared to leave. Not dramatically, not with a declaration or a final demonstration or any of the theatrical departures that cosmic beings often defaulted to. He simply began the process of withdrawing his presence from Universe 7, carefully, slowly, the way you remove a splinter rather than the way you pull off a bandage, with consideration for the tissue around the point of contact. With the first small, specific, real exercise of restraint not born from external force, but from internal choice. From knowing the cost, and caring about it. Whis felt the withdrawal. Felt the pressure on Universe 7's architecture beginning to ease. Felt the fractures respond, their closing accelerating slightly as the foreign presence reduced. He watched the Beyonder go, and felt something he hadn't entirely expected to feel. Not relief, not the satisfaction of a situation managed. Something quieter, something that lived in the small space that wasn't the function. The specific feeling of having been in the presence of something genuine. Something that had arrived as one thing and was leaving, not as another thing, not transformed, not fixed, but oriented. Pointed in a direction it hadn't had before. Toward something, by the simple, devastating, 10-billion-year-old wisdom of two words. Choose something. Stay. Before the Beyonder crossed back through the boundary, he paused. Turned back. Looked at Wise one more time with that witnessing attention, that full, costly, genuinely seeing look. "The truth about you," he said, "that I didn't know before I came here." Wise waited. "It isn't your power," the Beyonder said. "It isn't the function or the hierarchy or the cosmic architecture you maintain. It isn't even the weight you carry." He paused. "The truth about you is that you are the only being I have ever encountered whose existence is entirely complete. Not because you have everything, not because you can do anything." He looked at Wise with the full depth of his perception, all of it, undivided, uncataloguing, just asterisk present. "Because you are exactly where you're supposed to be," the Beyonder said, "and you know it, and it costs you something real to know it, and you carry that cost every day without it diminishing the knowing." He paused. "That is the rarest thing in any multiverse, in any cosmos, in any structure or system or hierarchy that existence has ever produced." He paused one final time. "I've met omnipotence before," he said quietly. "I am omnipotence, but I have never met that." He turned, crossed the boundary, and was gone. The boundary of Universe 7 sealed behind him. Clean, complete, as if he had never been there. Except for the fractures still slowly closing, and the weight still present, and the specific, small, real thing in the space that wasn't the function, slightly larger than it had been this morning. Not by much, but measurably, unmistakably. Wise stood at the boundary for a moment. Then he turned, looked at his cosmos, vast, luminous, patient, alive, continuing, and felt it the way he always felt it. Completely, at cost, with something that was not quite love and not quite duty, and lived in the space where those two things, if held long enough, become indistinguishable from each other. He raised his staff. Somewhere in Universe 7, a minor irregularity in a planetary orbit 300,000 light-years away corrected itself with the quiet, total precision of a function being performed by something that understood it completely. And Wise began walking, back toward a sleeping god of destruction who needed managing, back toward the work that was never finished, back toward the 10 billion years that had led here and the 10 billion more that would follow. Back toward the balance, the tea finished steeping. Wise poured it, held the cup, felt the warmth of it against his hands, specific, present, small, real. Somewhere in the cosmos, a minor irregularity corrected itself. Bira slept. The balance held. And for a moment, just a moment, the space that wasn't the function was exactly the right size. Not large, not empty, exactly right. The sound of balance played clean and full and complete. And Wise listened to it all the way through.